And welcome back, fellow football fanatics. This is College Football with Sam, and today we are breaking down and we are discussing, we are anticipating a wonderful, jam-packed Week 5 slate. So we don't just have wonderful games on Saturday, we have a few ranked matchups on Friday. Florida State versus Virginia, 7 p.m. on Friday. On 9 p.m. on Friday, we have TCU versus Arizona State. Even at 10:30 p.m., if you're interested in some kind of pseudo Pac-12 after dark, we got Houston at Oregon State. And then for Thursday, if you're really a sicko, we have Army traveling to East Carolina. But on Saturday, at noon, we have USC against Illinois. We have Notre Dame against Arkansas. Rutgers at Minnesota. We'll be talking about those three games today. At 3:30 p.m., we have Ohio State traveling to Washington, LSU traveling to Ole Miss, Auburn traveling to A&M, and Indiana traveling to Iowa. We'll talk about all of those with the exception of Auburn A&M. I am going to do a preview on that one, but I need to look at those teams more. I don't have a confident read there. 4:15, Tennessee traveling to undefeated Mississippi State. Maybe we'll talk about that one this week. I don't exactly know, but I do know that the night games, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, we got Oregon traveling to Penn State and Alabama traveling to Georgia. And those are the real games that I'm excited for and want to talk about. Not that the other ones aren't real games. They are. What I meant by that is these are games against top 5, top 10 opponents. If you believe in FPI, Alabama and Georgia is a top 5 game. If you believe in FPI as well, Penn State is the 10th best team trying to defend home field advantage against the number 1 team in Oregon. If you have your own differing personal thoughts, I know I have Oregon and Penn State personally probably top 3, top 4, top 5 at the worst. I'm going to be debuting new college football rankings this week, so you'll get my official, number A versus number B thoughts on Oregon and Penn State. And same thing for Alabama, Georgia. I imagine at least Georgia will be in my top 10 power ratings. Alabama at this point could be as well, but I don't know either. I don't know either whether or not Alabama will be. But anyway, that's not what I want to do tonight. There aren't going to be any rankings, no college football playoff predictions, brackets. That stuff's coming. Hopefully I can get a lot of that out tomorrow, Wednesday at the latest. Otherwise, we just won't do it. But this is an all Week 5 preview live. That is all we are doing. And then we have some special guests coming on Wednesday at 8 p.m. for my college football roundtable. Wednesday at 6 p.m. will be a live show for the 10 Reasons Why segment. I'll be giving 10 reasons why different teams can win different matches, sometimes fewer reasons, sometimes more, depending on how intensely I am connected. And we'll also be doing other previews separate from these live shows. There's a lot of content coming on a daily basis, as you guys saw last week, where there's just a ton of videos really every day except for Friday, which is my off day. Before we talk about... I've got something on my lip here. Sorry about that. Before we talk about Oregon and Penn State, I ask you all, if you haven't already, to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell. That way you can get notified when we go live Sundays, Mondays, and Wednesdays. Try and make it around 6 p.m. If not, a little bit before, a little bit after. But make sure to like, make sure to subscribe, make sure to hit that bell. Please and thank you. And also be active in the live chat. If you do want me to say something to your comment, if you want to ask me a question, have a guaranteed response, or if you just want to support the channel, a super chat is a good way of doing that. It's an excellent way of doing that. But let's talk about Oregon and Penn State. That's what we're going to lead the night off of. And what we're going to do is do a little bit of... we're going to go backwards a little bit. So I'm going to start with the night games, then we'll segue into the 3:30 games, and then we'll get to the noon kickoffs and close out with those. We're going to be talking about 8 games today. So make sure you're subscribed, like the video or show, share it around, and comment your thoughts down below. But let's begin. I'm really excited for this game. I think this is a real chance of being the game of the year. And there's going to be a lot of content about Oregon and Penn State specifically this week, as I am very much excited for it. The Oregon Ducks travel to the Penn State Nittany Lions in perhaps the game of the year, and from my personal standpoint, the most anticipated game yet this season, this Saturday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. 4:30 p.m. Pacific Time is what the kickoff will be for Oregon folks and the Oregon Ducks, as they're traveling multiple time zones, multiple hundreds, thousands of miles, all the way out to Penn State, all the way out to eastern Pennsylvania. Will be a really calm, cool 70 degrees Fahrenheit, 8-mile-per-hour winds. I think that's pretty wonderful weather for kickoff. Penn State's favored by 3.5 points right now. And it's so interesting how both of these teams, along with Ohio State, are top 3 in odds to win the national title. You can go to FanDuel right now and just click on their national championship odds, and it'll pop up that the top 3 teams in the Big Ten are viewed as the top 3 national title contenders. Ohio State at plus 550, Penn State and Oregon tied at plus 650. You look at conference winners in the Big Ten, Ohio State at plus 210 to win the Big Ten, Penn State at plus 260, Oregon at plus 280. These teams I thought were both underrated in the preseason. I thought that a lot of people were selling too much on Oregon, viewing them as a team that was somehow incapable of reloading, yet Ohio State and Texas and Georgia could just casually cock the shotgun and go right at it again. And for Oregon, for whatever reason, it would take some time. And I understood the segment, and I actually had them rated in the bottom half of that group of 4, but not more than a point or a tenth or half or some type of fraction of a point further away from any of those teams. Really, I didn't. The talent was evidently there. I thought the staff was there. The culture was there. Depth was a little bit concerning. It's part of the reason I thought they would start off slower than they did, and their start has impressed me. But I always thought by season's end, or some point, either by this game or after this game, they would be ready to compete at the highest level. And we've seen it. The efficiency metrics have Oregon pegged as the number 1 team in America. It's why FPI right now, ESPN's FPI, has them ranked the number 1 team in America. You go to the game on paper, their net statistics, their adjusted expected points added per play, which accounts for home field advantage, quality of opponent, and garbage time in FBS versus FBS games, has Oregon as the number 1 team as well, tied with USC, plus 0.53 adjusted expected points added per play. Penn State's 7th, Indiana is 6th, Ohio State's 12th, Washington's 5th. Some of these things are very fluky or a little bit interesting or weird or defy what your eyes or brain or preseason research may tell you, but the inventors of these efficiency metrics, people much smarter than myself, will tell you that these things will sort themselves out throughout the season. Oregon, per FPI's efficiency, has a 97.2 overall efficiency rating with the number 1 offense by a comfortable margin, 14th defense, 127th special teams unit, and they're first in FPI by a whole point and a fifth over Ohio State, who's the second best team. So Oregon, they've started off fast. I think my take on them being underrated has aged incredibly well. People like Phil Steele had them outside the top 10 for whatever reason, and others had them similarly outside of the top 10. I had Oregon preseason top 5, top 6, kind of in that 5th, 6th, and at sometimes 4th spot, kind of backing back and forth or going back and forth between those. For Penn State has had a slower start to the season, but they are 10th in FPI. In ESPN's efficiency metrics, Penn State is all the way down at 37th right now. Number 1 special teams, 12th defense, 77th offense. I have to tell you guys, there's no way that offense is 77th best in America. There is no way it's that bad. When you look at some of the advanced metrics, so adjusted expected points added per play, again, Penn State's 7th there. We already talked about Oregon as first. Penn State with a plus 0.39 adjusted EPA per play. You look at their defense, they're 5th in adjusted EPA per play. And you look at Penn State's offense, and the Nittany Lion offense is actually still fairly high, 36th in adjusted EPA per play with a plus 0.08 offensively. Landon Tengwall pointed out accurately on Twitter, and it's something that caused me to adjust how I was phrasing things, that you can't hide half the playbook. And that's true. You can't. I imagine Penn State's offense would look much worse if they were hiding half the playbook. You can't do that. But I do believe that Penn State has been saving things for this game and treating their approach to this game differently than Oregon, in part because these teams are different. And this is where I think really it's important to really get into the meat and potatoes of this matchup, in the sense that these are two elite teams, and yet I think there are some key differences within these teams. One key difference is seniority. You look at Oregon, and Oregon is a fantastic team, fantastic program. I think there is a realistic chance Oregon is the best team in America. As of right now, if we were only going off of this year, I'm not smarter than the people who make the advanced analytics. So I would say, if we're only looking at this year, yeah, Penn State or Oregon are probably, gosh, I already teased it. Yeah, you guys already probably know I think of Penn State as the best team in the nation still. But if you're just going off of the current analytics, not any preseason research, I'm still holding on to actually quite a bit of that for both of these teams since they haven't played any elite competition. Oregon, through 4 games, and only using that data, is the number 1 team in America. Dante Moore looks like an NFL quarterback. They've impressed me a ton offensively, and I think their secondary is better. I think it's more athletic. I think this overall team sort of is tagged along with that secondary, in the sense that this team is a higher ceiling than last year's team, but I don't know what its floor is. I don't know how it will perform in big games. There are still things about Oregon that we just don't know. For Penn State, I feel as if, just based on preseason research and even how this team is clearly playing their C game or worse, and yet they're still dominating inferior competition, I think in a way that last year's team didn't when they were playing C or worse games. I think it's clear that Penn State is better. The question is, how much higher is the ceiling than last season? Penn State under Franklin recently has always had a high floor. They need that ceiling and their average play to be raised in order to win the national title, on top of the Big Ten, winning a game like this, which they've struggled to do so, and beating Ohio State. But the point about seniority that I really wanted to make here is that you look at Penn State's depth chart, and their wide receivers starting, all seniors, even Devontae Ross, who him and Liam Clifford have been sharing time at wide receiver Z. I would expect Ross to start in this game. He's also a senior. You look at the offensive line, 3 starting seniors, 1 redshirt junior, another redshirt sophomore. And then the backup center's a redshirt junior, redshirt sophomore's a backup guard, and Cooper Cousins, a true sophomore, is pretty advanced. Khalil Dinkins, starting tight end, is a redshirt senior. Drew Aller, senior. Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton, seniors. Luke Reynolds at tight end, they're one of their rotational guys there, has looked pretty impressive. He's a true sophomore, but like Cooper Cousins, is pretty advanced. Defense, Denai Dennis Sutton, Zane Durant, Alonzo Ford Jr., Zariah Fisher. All seniors are redshirt seniors. Now, their 2 deep on D-line is young. That's an area that they identified in the preseason as having some thin depth. But true freshman Chaz Coleman, redshirt sophomore Ty Blanding, redshirt freshman Xavier Gillum, they've all looked good. Same with redshirt freshman Jalen Harvey. Tony Roas and Amari Campbell at linebacker are juniors. A.J. Harris is a junior. Zakee Wheatley's a redshirt senior. Zion Tracy and Davion Collins are juniors. Elliott Washington is a junior. The only really young player in that secondary is Anthony Belgrave Shorter. And I could see it in some games where the angles and tackling and just who he is, he's still clearly a younger player. DB and then the 2 deep of that D-line are the younger parts of the defense. But their starters are littered with seniors. And Oregon is also a deep team. and they look pretty good. But you look at, say, wide receiver. They have a true freshman, Decorian Moore, starting. Malik Benson and Gary Bryant Jr. are seniors. Pregnon, World, and Harkey are seniors. Offensive line, the remainder, Lalolu and Uli, are juniors. Sadiq is a junior at tight end. Dante Moore's a redshirt sophomore. Noah Whittington, a redshirt senior. Jaden Lamar is a junior. And much of their depth at wide receiver, like Penn State's, is pretty young. Depth at running back is a little bit younger than Penn State's. And then offensive line, similar age. You look on defense, they're starting redshirt freshman Tiani Gray at nose tackle. Amari Washington, Tatum Tuioti, Mateo Uiagalelei are juniors. Bryce Betcher's a redshirt senior at linebacker. Devin Jackson is a redshirt junior at linebacker. And then you look at secondary, 3 freshmen, 1 true freshman currently is player 1. They're 2 deep there. Outside of Theron Johnson is full of sophomores or redshirt freshmen. Oregon is just a bit younger, really at every position outside of maybe the offensive line. And then when you factor in recruiting, where Oregon's usually ahead of Penn State's actually well in advance of Oregon on the O-line in terms of blue chip ratio. Both are dominant in the advanced metrics and in the margin of victory category. So points per play margin, Oregon with a 0.595, Penn State with a 0.494. Those are elite numbers right there. Obviously, Oregon's offense operating at a higher level than Penn State's offense, 0.735 points per play compared to Penn State's 0.58. That 0.58 for Penn State I actually found pretty impressive. I know there's, I think, a pick 6 included in that, so that's a big play. But still pretty impressive given just how bad Drew Aller has looked, how inconsistent he's looked. And yet they're still scoring points and beating teams by upper 30s, lower 40s, upper 40s. For most of the game against Villanova, or for parts of the game, it felt like they were always winning by 50-plus points. FCS team, yes, but, good teams beat FCS teams by 50 casually. Look at what Oregon did to Montana State. That was a fast start. I think that FPI has punished Penn State just a little bit too much, and I think people might be reading too much into that. As for Oregon, I actually don't think really that people are reading into Oregon's ratings too much. Maybe in some instances, but Oregon they're a monster. They're an efficiency monster. They're clean. They're sharp. They're polished. Dante Moore, I'm going to say right now, is the best quarterback in this game. That's why Oregon has quarterback at X Factor, and Penn State just does not. I think that offensive line is an X factor for both Penn State and Oregon. I think tight end's an X factor for Oregon. Linebacker, I'm going to go with them along with the defensive line for Penn State's defense. And I would also include Mateo Uiagalelei and Tatum Tuioti at defensive end as X factor players for the Nittany Lions and for the Oregon Ducks. I think that both of these teams are some of the best teams in America. And I'm going to make a video on it. Again, make sure you've subscribed and hit that notification bell. I'm going to make a video on it that I think these could be the top 2 teams in America. Could be number 1 versus number 2. So I'm super excited and super pumped for this game. I cannot wait to watch it. My eyes are going to be glued to the TV screen here. But let's get into some of the... Okay, hold on. I need to put my dog outside. My apologies. Hold on. Sorry about that, guys. Really, really sorry about that. I unfortunately, while I'm making pretty good money on this channel now, more than ever before, I unfortunately do not control the residency I live at. If it were up to me, I would never have a dog because that would help a lot with my workflow, and I just don't like dogs. I'm not a dog person. Maybe that makes me unlikable to some of you. But yeah, that stuff unfortunately will happen until I'm out of here, until I'm gone. So let me just really quickly, I know this is going to be weird, but let me figure out what went wrong. Just that way I can get that preview out and it not be corrupted by the barking. Let me figure out what went wrong there. Again, my bad, guys. I'll continue to talk about the game a little bit while trying to figure out what, if anything, went wrong. How are you guys doing, by the way? Still listening. Okay, I found a natural breaking point. Again, sorry about that, guys. I hate it as much as I do. If not for any improvement in my maturity, I would have said a year ago, if that happened, that the show was ruined and just kind of peter out for the rest. So I just want to make sure that your quality isn't ruined and that other viewers' quality after this show isn't ruined. That is what I want to make sure of. So my apologies for that. There will be a timestamp where I had to put him outside before he ruined the audio, and there will be a timestamp for when I once again begin the segment, and those will be merged together into the preview and exported. So thank you for your patience. Yeah, thanks. And again, my apologies for that, but the show must continue. Again, I'm very excited for this game. I cannot describe how excited I am for this matchup. I think, again, it could be game of the century. We could get to the national title game and look back on this matchup between the Ducks and the Lions and think, holy cow, this was the national title game. And now we're getting a rematch, maybe even a rematch of the rematch. These teams could face off 3 times. That's what I actually had projected in my college football playoff bracket. My final one is that Oregon and Penn State would face off against each other 3 times. But let's get into some of the key storylines here. I think it's critical for Oregon to be able to run the football and pass protect. Stopping the run is important too, but I want to focus on how necessary it is that Oregon is able to move against this Jim Knowles defense. So they got Jim Knowles the first time last year. Oregon did, Dan Lanning did, Will Stein did, and Dylan Gabriel, Tez Johnson, Evan Stewart. I hope Evan Stewart gets healthy and can have a huge bounce back year next season. They got Knowles, but then Knowles made some adjustments, and in the Rose Bowl rematch, Oregon couldn't do a damn thing until really garbage time, where Ohio State clearly decided, okay, hey, we're up 34-0. we want to get out of here, preserve our depth, preserve our energy for a tough Texas team in the Cotton Bowl, and then hopefully have enough to win the national title and win it pretty convincingly. They could not really pass protect in the Rose Bowl last year, at least long enough for things to develop and Gabriel to be able to hit open receivers. I think a large part of Oregon's inability to pass protect in the Rose Bowl had actually to do with coverage, and Ohio State being so good in coverage, and their defensive line and linebackers also being elite, to the point where the whole unit's elite, guys can't get open, and consequently you're only going to have so much time in the pocket. So even if it is 3 or 4 seconds, which is plenty of time, since nothing can develop downfield, you get a coverage sack. And sometimes they just straight up beat their man too. It was a manhandling of Oregon. That was Jim Knowles' defense, but so was Jim Knowles' defense that also got beat in Autzen last year. So can Oregon find a way to score on Penn State's defense, to run the ball to keep that defense honest, and also can they pass protect? Isaiah World, when you look at Penn State and Oregon's tackles, is actually the worst graded starting tackle right now. And part of it, I believe, is pass protection, and he has had some issues there with the Ducks so far. And this is very early on against inferior opponents. So is that flukish, or will that show up in a big way against Denai Dennis Sutton or Chaz Coleman? And as for Drew Aller, can they step up? Him and Penn State's offense, which has been very underperforming. Do we see them step up and take a step forward in this game against an Oregon defense that I would argue at secondary is more athletic and is better than they were last year? And I don't know if they quite have the defensive line they did last year. I don't think they do on the interior, but defensive end is better, and I think linebacker has totally reloaded. So what does their offense look like? Is it fluid? Is it rusty as it's been in the first 3 games? And then from there, you branch off into some other key factors. Travel, I cannot emphasize enough. Travel combined with the new environment shook Ohio State last year. You could see it. In hindsight with the Rose Bowl, Ohio State, even I think in that matchup, was the better team. But the travel, Oregon's home field advantage, and I think Oregon wanting the game more from a coaching angle. Both teams' players were very intense there. But Oregon being extremely aggressive and going for it on 4th and goal the first time and having an onside kick and doing those things, they wanted that. That staff wanted that. And I think the fight Oregon had along with the home field advantage and travel really shocked Ohio State. Then in the Rose Bowl, when Ohio State was better adjusted, made some adjustments to their scheme, when their depth and talent had survived the regular season, and Oregon's did too, but as you go throughout the year, those things become more noticeable. The difference in talent becomes more noticeable. That's why these teams that end up winning it all may not always look like the best team in America at first, but then as things evolve and they play more games and there's a larger sample, it becomes clear who the contenders and who the pretenders are. And Oregon last year, in terms of being the number 1 team in America, was in fact a pretender. And Ohio State was the real deal, and they showed that in the Rose Bowl. But that didn't take away from Oregon's regular season win. Here, those factors that helped Oregon are fighting against them now. The travel, the environment, the fact, too, that even though Oregon may be the better team in this game, same with Ohio State against Oregon last year, we don't know that. I mean, what if Penn State is the better team on top of having these edges? I think that's why Penn State's a full 3.5-point favorite, is there is debate amongst who's the better team here. It's not consensus, such as the power ratings always having Ohio State ahead of Oregon last year, where Ohio State was viewed by the books as always being the better team. Here, there's debate. There's arguments for Oregon. If you're more of throw all the preseason research out now, you're with Oregon. If you still think preseason research is a huge part of what these teams are currently, not saying that'll always be the case, because after they play a few big games, what is happening here and now is all that will matter. We can agree on that. But if you're more in these teams haven't played anyone yet, so you still got to take stock in who they are from a preseason standpoint, then you're probably with Penn State, or you think these teams are pretty evenly matched power ratings wise. And this is where I get into some other factors. So Penn State's rushing attack, quarterback, Aller has only had one designed run. He will be running the ball here. Same with the running backs and offensive line. That's a no-duh. And as for Oregon, we know Dante Moore can run. We know that offensive line can move people. We know they have a deep running back room. Who's stronger in that aspect? Who moves defensive lines further down the field? Who sits defensive linemen down on their butts? Which offensive line does that? Because both have that capability. For receiver, Oregon, I would say right now, has the superior receiver room, including tight end, in terms of your number one guys. I think Moore would be the number one guy on each team. Sadiq would be the number one guy. But Penn State has closed the gap there. Last year, Oregon was definitely better at receiver and a little bit inferior at tight end, but Sadiq was so freakish that you could make the argument, hey, he's pretty close to Tyler Warren in some regards. Now, Penn State's caught up to Oregon at receiver. They don't have a Dante Moore, but they have Trevor Pena. They have Devontae Ross. They have Kyron Hudson. They've made that leap there. Even if you don't believe me, just watch their film at prior schools or in these first few games. You can tell Penn State's better at receiver. And I can also tell that Luke Reynolds and Khalil Dinkins are good enough to put up their own fight against Oregon's linebackers in the same way Oregon's tight ends can against Penn State's linebackers. So tight end and wide receiver separation, who can get behind the defenses more easily, I think there's debate there. Strong debate. Defensive tackle is important. This is a Big Ten game. Interior trench play is going to decide a lot. Penn State historically has not been strong there, and Oregon lost 2 NFL defensive tackles. So which defensive tackles that aren't really well known to the public makes a name for themselves here, if at all? Because both interior offensive lines, love them. Both interior defensive lines, have some questions about one of them. You'll see who that is in the end. And as for edge and linebackers, who tackles better, who gets more pressure, that's going to be a big deal here in this game. It's going to be a huge deal. Who gets more pressure on each quarterback, and which quarterback handles it better? Dante Moore or Drew Aller? Neither have faced a ton of pressure yet this year. This is going to be the best front each offense and offensive line has faced by a mile. We got to get into the prediction for this game. I hate it because I could talk about this game all day, but each thing has to come to an end. Each beautiful thing has to come to an end. We've spent plenty of time on this matchup. So when I turn the page and look at this game and think, okay, who's going to win? Who has the advantages? I honestly lean a bit more towards my preseason research for these two teams and and the matchup for both than I do some other games. Alabama's played Florida State. Wisconsin, I'm not really counting with how bad they look. Georgia's played Tennessee. And even then, I would still look at a lot of preseason research for those two. Because it's week 5. They've only played 4 games. Penn State's only played 3. Georgia and Alabama have only played 3. Oregon's played 4, but like Penn State, they've played nobody who can compete with them. I still think that Penn State is the number 1 team in America. I think Oregon right now is better than I would have thought Oregon to be in the preseason when they played this game. But I still think that Oregon is going to do a really good job, or that Penn State's going to do a really good job limiting Oregon's rushing offense. And I think their rushing offense, the Nittany Lions, will do a good job getting penetration, getting downfield, and at times getting to the second level and higher on this Oregon defense. I think that Penn State will run. At times it will. And I think they'll do a pretty good job making life hell for Oregon running on the ground. The pass game is a little bit different here. I think that Oregon will have some success against Penn State passing the football. I don't think that Penn State will have tremendous success through the air against Oregon. But I think Oregon has, while they have an elite wide receiver 1, an elite tight end 1, Penn State has fantastic linebackers, and A.J. Harris is a really good corner. And Penn State has enough wide receiver production, which they have not had since really 2022, 2021. They have enough of it and enough tight end production, and Aller is going to be well protected enough by those tackles and good enough on his own accord to find guys, whether it's downfield, whether it's in the short or intermediate passing game. Again, Oregon is averaging 8.23 yards per play overall with a 50% success rate. Penn State has a 49.2% success rate, averaging 6.3 yards per play. You look at yards per dropback, Oregon's averaging 10.1. Penn State's just averaging a pretty mediocre 6.9. But Penn State has a 47.8 passing success rate. Oregon is a 53.3. I think Penn State's passing game is successful enough and is also hiding enough wrinkles here. Not half the playbook. Not going that far. That's intellectually dishonest. They're hiding enough wrinkles to where I think they're going to come out and they're going to have enough success, or more than enough success through the air, to really pour it on offensively. Oregon's running for 6.9 yards per attempt, only allowing a 5.8% havoc rate. Havoc rate, by the way, is tackles for loss, interception, forced fumbles, passes defended, and sacks. Penn State's only allowing a 5.4 havoc rate. It's one of the few units, along with Indiana's, that allows and USC's, that allows a lower havoc rate percent than Oregon's. That's because their offensive line is really that good. So quarterback for Penn State, I do have some concerns there. I do think Moore at this point is better than Aller, but we don't know that yet. And that is something that I think people need to come off of a bit. We don't know. It's only through 4 games for Oregon, 3 for Penn State. Drew Aller, as it stands right now with the metrics, is going to be worse than he was in 2023. I don't think that's happening. Dante Moore, I totally believe, is going to be as good as his metrics say. But I think that Penn State is better than the current efficiency metrics suggest. I've not come off of thinking that at the start of the year or the end of the year, they're going to be the number 1 team. Look at their defense, their special teams, the environment. If you want to look at a player-per-player basis, and their strength of schedules are pretty similar, so you can use PFF grades, Penn State's just a little bit better about everywhere, except for quarterback. But everywhere else, they're just a little bit better or can match Oregon. In some spots, like defensive tackle, they're actually significantly better. So give me the team that I think is the better overall roster, who I think is the best coordinator in Jim Knowles, and they're facing the worst coordinator, Andy Kotelnicki and Drew Aller are, in Tosh Lupoy in this matchup. And also, to add a little bit of icing on the cake, Penn State does have more efficient special teams. Number 1 in America, Oregon outside the top 100 per ESPN's efficiency metrics. I think Penn State wins and covers the 3.5-point spread. I thought preseason that Penn State would pretty handily beat Oregon. My bold prediction was they would win by 17, Penn State would, and the counter to that was later in the year when Oregon would be better, they would beat USC by 17 or more. Now I'm kind of thinking that Penn State doesn't win by 17 because Oregon started off faster, and I want to hedge a little bit. I think that Penn State's clearly going to be the better team, but I don't know that for sure, especially with how fast Oregon started off. And I have faith in Oregon. I have faith in Dan Lanning. I think that they are a very good roster, a great team and program. I'm going to go with Penn State by 10 here to win by 10 points. It's probably scoring 30s, maybe 40s. But I'm going to really stick with 30s here because I don't think Oregon is going to lose by more than 2 or 3 scores at the end. And it will take a little bit before Penn State pulls away, I think. Going a little bit conservative with my prediction. I think that this is the hardest game for Oregon and will be their hardest game this season. I think if they come out and win by double digits, as many in fact have suggested on my social media feeds, then they're going 16-0 and winning it all. If Oregon comes in here and burns this place down, they're not losing to Ohio State, they're not losing to Georgia, they're not losing certainly to Penn State in a neutral field rematch. So I think that if Oregon isn't going to win it all here, if you don't think they are going to, then I have a hard time picking them to win this game. This is a very tough test, even if you're not as high on Penn State as I am, and you're higher on Oregon than I am. So I'm going with Penn State to win and cover. Okay, now we can talk about Alabama and Georgia. That was probably a very long, exhaustive preview and prediction video. Very, very long, very exhaustive. We've already been live for 40 minutes, and like 30 of that was Oregon, Penn State. The remainder will be shorter, and there will be more videos on Oregon, Penn State than any matchup we've done so far, including a deep dive video that'll probably be an additional 30 minutes, 45. It'll be less of my excitement for the game, and there will be more advanced metrics, PFF grades for players, more in detail of how I think the game will go. Might even change my score prediction depending on how I look into things. That's coming later in the week, though. That'll be like Wednesday at the earliest, Thursday at the latest, probably. So stay tuned for all of that. And again, this is no hate to Oregon. I think it'd be pretty cool if Oregon went 16-0 after a lot of people wrote them off as a top 5, top 6 team this year. That would be incredible. I like the idea of Oregon actually being the number 1 program in football moving forward. Not saying I think it will be. I just like the idea. I like the concept. I think it's more entertaining than Alabama, Georgia, Texas, or Ohio State being the number 1 program moving forward. But feelings, from my perspective, are not facts. And if I'm wrong on my prediction, I will eat my words. This is the toughest possible game and matchup that Oregon has all season long. It is. If you travel to Ohio State, you don't have the same trench disadvantage there, and it's not the same travel. Like, you don't have quite as many miles, and you're not going to have like an hour or so of driving out in the middle of nowhere. You know, like the environment of Penn State will be a little bit more challenging than if it were in Columbus, and I think Oregon matches up better or better with Ohio State than they do Penn State, just as an example. Georgia, maybe Georgia would be as hard as Penn State. Maybe. But I think preseason research says that Penn State is better than Georgia. And so far, based on how these teams have played, I actually think that Penn State is better than Georgia. The efficiency metrics aren't as high on Georgia as they are on Oregon. You can never discount Kirby Smart, though. That might be the one trip, along with maybe, because it's still very warm, maybe Miami down in Florida. And that has more to do with the trench matchup, not just the, travel into hot weather in a hot climate. That has also to do with why I like Penn State here. Miami and Penn State, I think, have the best trench play in America right now. And for Oregon, who's also really, really good there, but they kind of hang their hat on that, especially on defense traditionally under Lupoy, to have that challenge and to have your strength potentially be outmatched, that can be pretty damning in a matchup, especially when I don't think Penn State no longer has that massive air disadvantage like they did against Oregon in the Big Ten title game. I think they've caught up a little bit there. So that's just my opinion. It's time to move on. We'll be talking about now Alabama and Georgia is what we will be talking about now. And this will just be 10-15 minutes, same with the remainder of these preview and prediction videos. The Alabama Crimson Tide travel to Sanford Stadium for the first time since 2015. It's been a decade, a little bit more than a decade, since they traveled to play Georgia. Absolutely criminal. Hopefully we get, with the 9-game conference schedule for the SEC, hopefully we get more of these matchups between two programs right now that are in the elite tier of college football. Maybe Alabama's just circling that, but I'm going to give them benefit of the doubt for now. They've looked better, and I feel like they've rebounded after that catastrophic at the time Florida State loss. Now the efficiency metrics, the power ratings, things that view Georgia and Alabama as both top 5 teams, view Florida State as a top 25 team. Efficiency views them as a top 10, top 5 team even. We'll see if that continues with their game against Virginia this Friday. But I want to talk about the Tide and the Bulldogs here. 7:30 p.m. kick, 70 degrees Fahrenheit, 3-mile-per-hour winds. Georgia is just a slight 2.5-point favorite here. What do I think of this new matchup here? It's no longer Saban versus Kirby. It's DeBoer versus Kirby. That's the new matchup here. And Kirby Smart got bested by Kalen DeBoer last year after a failed comeback. This year, Alabama had a pretty bad loss week 1. It seems like they've rebounded and come out on fire since then, but still have some issues, particularly in rushing offense. Georgia giving up that many points to Tennessee honestly shocked me, and in a bad way. Their defense has struggled getting pressure. They've struggled a tad bit in pass protection, and I think that their secondary just isn't as good as Kirby Smart and Glenn Schumann are accustomed to. Looking at dominant statistics, Georgia's 3-0, Alabama is 2-1. Alabama yet has a 0.383 points per play margin. Georgia's is just a 0.146. In terms of scoring offense, Alabama and Georgia are actually pretty similar there. Alabama's at a 0.65 points per play. Georgia's 0.536. Defense is the difference. Georgia's giving up nearly 0.4 of a point per play, which again, shocked me. A lot of it were big plays, many of which were flukish, but the fact that Chris Brazzell kept catching those, I think, makes it such that some of that may not have been flukish. I don't know exactly what to take away from that or how much to take away from that. Alabama's only giving up 0.266. It's also in the style that both defenses have failed. Georgia's, they typically failed instantaneously, just in a snap of a finger, one big play. Alabama's against Florida State was more failure by 1,000 paper cuts, where Florida State just kept running, ramming the same concept, the same zone read concept down their throat, and they couldn't defend Castellanos. They couldn't defend the freshman running back. They got pushed around by Florida State's offensive line late in the game. Surprisingly, the power ratings actually view Alabama. Part of it's because Florida State has looked really good against bad teams, which is usually an indication that they're at least a good team. Power ratings think Alabama is the third best team in America, at least FPI does. 22.2 rating. UGA is a 21.7 rating, which is fourth. I believe that both quarterbacks, Ty Simpson and Gunnar Stockton, are X-Factor players in this game. For Alabama, they're receivers. Same with Georgia, actually. I like Zachariah Branch, Dylan Bell, London Humphreys, Colby Young. They've improved drastically there. And as for Alabama, Ryan Williams, Jeremy Bernard, Isaiah Horton, these are going to be two great passing offenses that are going to be exchanging blows this Saturday night in Sanford. Linebacker, I think, is an X factor for both defenses. I went with DB for Alabama, and I went with defensive line for Georgia. Maybe I should have went defensive line for Alabama. They're getting Tim Keenan, the third back at defensive tackle, and that, believe me, is that is a massive deal. If they had him against Florida State, I don't know if they win, but they probably don't get gashed and have that same concept destroy them over and over and over again. They probably look better in their smaller games too. I mean, he's projected to be a first-round defensive tackle, at least last time I checked on mock drafts, which honestly was the preseason, if I'm being honest. But he's an impact player, and his backup got injured and is out for the year in a practice following the Florida State game. So Alabama's thin at D tackle. Getting an X-factor potential alien D tackle back is always super helpful. So look out for that. I think that these teams, more so than perhaps any matchup this week, are very evenly matched and built to play a good game. So Ohio State, Washington. Washington could win. Yeah, Ohio State could also win by 50. Like, watch Washington play. You'll understand what I mean. For Oregon, Penn State, Oregon could win. If the efficiency metrics are totally correct, maybe Oregon wins by double digits. If the efficiency metrics are maybe overvaluing the Ducks a bit, or they're just incomplete, there's also a world where with the travel, Penn State could blow out Oregon. You look at the week 1 games, Clemson, LSU, that could have been a blowout either way. Both those teams look pretty mediocre. Maybe one of them just plays to their ceiling earlier. Get a blowout. Ohio State, Texas. If Manning is who Feinbaum said he was, and he's looked like it at times, so we know he has that in him, Texas wins. Perhaps they control the game. If Ohio State maybe was a little bit more aggressive, didn't need to be, but maybe they win big. Here, and a lot of those are hypotheticals, but breathe with me. I don't see a world where any of these teams dominate the other. I don't see that here. I think this is a very evenly matched, perfect setting, perfect time, perfect matchup for a back and forth, keeping you on your toes affair. You will be up watching this game, and if you're a fan of either of these teams, you'll be gritting your teeth until 11:30 p.m. This game might even go to overtime. The questions that I have are, can Alabama establish game control? Because when you run the football as poorly as they have, whether it's against Wisconsin, Florida State, their other opponent I don't really care about if I'm being honest, that's concerning. And against a team in Georgia who is better at running the football than Alabama, that's especially concerning. But for Georgia, do they get pressure? Because a big part of the reason why it turns out that Ty Simpson was so inaccurate against Florida State, and honestly so bad at times, was because Florida State got to him. And Florida State made his life uncomfortable. I mean, James Williams was beating the crap out of Caden Proctor. Their tackles in the middle were killing Parker Brailsford, killing those guards. I mean, Florida State's 3-3-5 ate that offensive lineup, especially as the game went on. And I also don't think Alabama took Florida State probably as seriously as they're going to take Georgia because of the, not rivalry in the sense of traditional rivalry, but a competitive rivalry aspect. They're coming off of a bye. Georgia won the SEC last year, nearly beat them. They played them last year. Florida State was an unfamiliar opponent who went 2-10, and Alabama players, in reaction to what Castellano said, just kind of laughed at him like he was an idiot. Turns out, at least in that instance, in that game, he was correct as he won. Georgia needs to get pressure because when Wisconsin didn't and when the G5 team didn't, Simpson was perfect. Quite literally perfect. I mean, there's a reason Kirby Smart says he's the hottest quarterback in football right now. Past 2 games Alabama's played, he has been unstoppable. Even without a rushing attack, him and Bernard and Huevis and Williams and Horton and other receivers, they cannot be stopped through the air. He looked like an NFL first-round quarterback against, I know Wisconsin, but Wisconsin, I've watched them play. They have a good defensive front. Secondary's questionable, but it's not G5 level. Tore them to shreds. Georgia just gave up a ton of big plays to a Tennessee offense that in theory is not nearly as talented as Alabama's. Again, in theory. There are things that Tennessee offense does, I think, in practice that are much better than Alabama. Running the football, for example. And they may have tougher receivers, and I think Kitzelman would be the best tight end in the team. But again, a lot of that's theory, some of it's practice here, and Georgia's also at home. So can Georgia get pressure with a bye to prepare, with the home field advantage, with that crowd? Can they get behind their team, and can they send pressure forward in Simpson's face and maybe force a turnover or two? The style of quarterbacks, I think, is another key factor to pay attention to. Which style is tougher for each defense? Simpson is sneakily athletic, I know, but DeBoer usually likes his quarterbacks to stay in the pocket and to be more of a field general and a gunslinger. Doesn't necessarily like them to run all over the place. That's why he loved Michael Penix. For Georgia, I think they're willing to be a little bit more loose with Stockton. We've seen several designed runs with him, and he's looked pretty efficient as a passer. So there are some slight differences in the style of quarterbacks. I also think Simpson's arm is more talented than Stockton's, although Stockton's arm clearly, just look at that throw on the 4th down against Tennessee in the end zone. That was a NFL level throw. Which style messes with each defense more? Georgia has so far had problems. I know it's a 1-game sample, but it's all we have to go off of. And last year, their secondary was kind of the weakness of the defense. They've had issues stopping big passing plays, and Alabama has looked like a hot mess when dealing with mobile quarterbacks. Pass protection is key. I want to see which team gets movement on the lines of scrimmage, which O-line gets their feet across the line of scrimmage more often, which D-line doesn't get pushed as far back on the line of scrimmage. Another interesting factor to keep in mind is the chess match between Kirby Smart and then Ryan Grubb, Kalen DeBoer, and include Glenn Schumann with Kirby Smart. That chess match is going to be fascinating. But so is the chess match between Mike Bobo, who gets a lot of hate for Georgia, at a time I thought deservingly so, but a little bit too harsh nonetheless. So far this year, I think he's called a wonderful offense. I think what he wants to do and what Stockton wants to do and is built to do actually complements each other very well, for reasons I can't necessarily explain, but it was clear that their offense was humming, even factoring in the secondary issues for Tennessee in that game. It was clear the offense is well gelled, they have good chemistry, they're connected, they know what's up, and they're playing to their talent level. And then you got Kane Womack for Alabama's defense. How do they deal with Stockton? I'm especially fascinated with that one, actually. Smart and DeBoer, of course, for the head coach, and then Schumann and Grubb, what both teams are known for right now. DeBoer for the offense, Kirby for the defense. But the other chess match might actually be more important here, given how vulnerable Alabama has looked on the road against mobile QBs in particular, and Georgia checks both of those boxes. Sanford Stadium, that's another factor here, honestly, since Alabama hasn't really played a game there. No one on this current roster has, but that's a factor that really comes after all of those other factors. So home field advantage matters. It's why Georgia is favored here, when if this game were neutral field, FPI would say that Alabama should be favored, and if the line's at 2.5, if this were neutral field, I feel like Alabama might be favored by 1.5, maybe to be a pick'em that would lean Alabama, just based on how the lines have moved. Based on other factors excluding home field advantage, I do believe that Georgia is going to come out with a win here. I think they're going to win, and if not for the line being at 2.5, if it were, say, 3.5, I'd actually pick Alabama to cover. I'm kind of thinking Georgia wins by 3 here. If they don't, it's going to be between 3 and 7 points. The logic behind an Alabama competitive game, but Georgia eventually coming out on top, even when I think, look, there's a reason why the lines moved in Alabama's direction. I think that Alabama has some favorable matchups here. In fact, I initially favored Alabama in this spot, but I said preseason I wasn't going to pick against Kirby Smart, with rare exception, and I don't think Alabama yet has it for this game. If this were in Bryant-Denny Stadium again, I would pick Alabama. If this were neutral field, I might even pick Alabama. But if this were neutral field, I would also come back to these same ideas that Georgia can run the football better, and especially factoring in Stockton's mobility, I think that they're going to give that Alabama defense potentially hell on the ground. And I think that they can do a better job of stopping the run than Alabama can. Passing is a whole nother can of worms to open up, but I think they're pretty evenly matched there. I think that Alabama's secondary entering the year was overrated by almost everyone, including myself. We'll see what happens in this game, but I think there are points where they can be gettable. More so probably in running than pass defense. I think that, and by running I mean tackling, so stopping the run. And I think that Georgia's secondary, while gettable in the air, yes, this time they're going to be at home. And I think that with a bye, Kirby is going to come out with a better game plan to mitigate some of those weaknesses and take advantage of some parts of Alabama's offense. So UGA's staff being better is actually a big part of the reason why I'm going with Georgia here. I think Georgia has matchup edges in their run defense versus Alabama's rushing offense. I don't think Alabama will break 100 yards. If you account for sacks, I don't even think they'll break 50. I think that Alabama will not run the ball, and they'll keep it close because their passing offense with DeBoer's schematics and Simpson's newfound poise and confidence is that good, especially against a Georgia secondary that I think is limited. But I think that Georgia's passing offense will get some wins over Alabama's pass defense, and that, along with Georgia doing a better job at running the football, I think is ultimately going to matter here. I mean, I just can't get over the idea that, yes, Georgia has questions in the offensive line. They're projected starting O-line right now is Monroe Freeling, Micah Morris, Drew Bobo, Ernest Green III, and freshman Juan Gaston at right guard. Alabama's in theory with Caden Proctor, Cam Dewberry, Parker Brailsford, Geno Van DeMark, and Wilkin Formby should in theory be better. And yet they can't run the ball as good as Georgia can. And also Caden Proctor, week one, I can't get that in my mind. That's the best defensive line they've played so far. Best defensive front, maybe best defensive coordinator. Tony White over the past 3 years has looked better than Mike Tressel for Wisconsin. And I just think that the lines of scrimmage advantage, I know Tim Keenan's back for Alabama, but think about LT Overton, Tim Keenan III, James Smith, Qua Russo versus Georgia's Gabe Harris Jr., Jordan Hall, Christian Miller, Quintavious Johnson, and then Elo Mendoza, Xavier McLeod, linebacker C.J. Allen, Raylan Wilson for Georgia, and Alabama, Deontay Lawson, Justin Jefferson. Which front scares you more? Both scare me, but I think Georgia scares me a little bit more. I think that trench advantage helps Georgia win this game, and they'll be good enough on the outside to match Alabama and emerge with a close yet very important win that will propel Georgia to 4-0, 2-0 in SEC play. Alabama will earn their second loss of the season. Wouldn't be shocked if I were wrong here, though. I think this is going to be the closest game and potentially most entertaining game of Week 5. All right. Can move on now to Indiana and Iowa. I'm excited to talk about this game, too. Honestly, this game right here, I'm excited to see it because I think there is a good chance that Iowa being in Kinnick with the roster that they have, they could maybe play this close. They always have a chance in Kinnick when they're good, and I think they're good. But Indiana could also do what they have done against every team that doesn't have a massive talent edge. They could roster Iowa in their own house. So I'm excited for this matchup, and this is one that I am very much looking forward to talking about. Let me know what game you are most excited for in Week 5. I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on this matter. Which game, again, are you most excited for in Week 5? Let me know in the live chat, and I will try to get a sense of where you, which right now for me is the public, and where you stand on this. The Indiana Hoosiers, coming fresh off a 63-10 drumming of the then 9th-ranked Illinois Fighting Illini, travel to Kinnick Stadium in a new, unfamiliar, and as Kurt Cignetti himself said, a tougher challenge than last week in facing off against the Iowa Hawkeyes, who are fresh off a win against Rutgers on the road, where I think Gronowski built some confidence, and that was a Friday night game, so they have an extra day of rest here. This is going to be a 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time kickoff, 2:30 p.m. local time kickoff in Iowa City. Going to be 80 degrees about at kickoff, 9-mile-per-hour winds. The spread last week was just Indiana minus 2.5. It's jumped up to minus 4.5 in favor of the Hoosiers. And I'm going to check really quick, but I get the feeling as if the line might be growing. Yes, it is. It's on FanDuel. It's already at 8.5. Actually, it just moved up to 8.5. A lot of sharps, a lot of people, not just the public, but people with money and the know-how love Indiana in the spot. But let's investigate 7.5 at some places still. Let's investigate if that's actually the case here. Because Iowa, I think with the offense they have right now, with Gronowski, look, I saw it a little bit against Iowa State. UMass, obviously, everyone saw it, but it's UMass. And then I really saw it against Rutgers. Now, Rutgers, again, is a pretty bad defense. Indiana's defense kind of honestly reminds me of Iowa's of old. A lot of underrated NFL athletes who were 3 stars or 2 stars or 1 stars who were developed into playing like 4 or 5 star players. Illinois' offense just got crushed, got destroyed by that Indiana defense. And that wasn't in a flukish way. That was in a very intentional, purposeful, sustainable way that they did it. Indiana's defense is ridiculously good, but all that being said, Gronowski threw some balls, touch passes, even had a deep shot, had some other short passes where at times, yes, he messed up, but he is clearly Iowa's most talented, gifted quarterback since Nate Stanley, late 2010s. And this is a huge game for Iowa, too. This is a program game for Iowa, I think. Indiana has been under you. In fact, they've been under the house that is the Big Ten. They've been dead and buried for decades. And now Curt Cignetti comes in last year, rebuilds the roster, rebuilds the program. They start winning. They gain momentum. End of the year power ratings and efficiency-wise, they're top 10. Right now, they're bordering on top 5 in those. Right now, they have a 0.419 points per play margin. And they've played a tougher opponent in Illinois than a lot of teams have this year. A lot of teams have still played opponents that are worse than that Illinois team that Indiana just beat 63-10. Iowa's a points per play margin of 0.220, but much like Indiana, they've at least faced a test. Rutgers on the road was a test. Iowa State on the road is a test. This is their first test at home. Defense is a little bit worse than it's been, usually under Phil Parker. The offense, though, is scoring 0.497 points per play to IU's 0.635. Gronowski, that rushing offense, that offensive line, even Iowa's receivers, Sam Phillips, Jacob Gill, Seth Anderson, KJ Parker, Caden Weegan, they've improved from last year. Oftentimes when returning production is that bad at wide receiver, and believe me, Iowa's receiver core was that bad last year, oftentimes it doesn't really get better. Case in point, Michigan State secondary when they all came back for 2022. This wide receiver core, I think, at least got a little bit better. I think they have more athleticism, better hands, etc. Trevor Locke, Bo Steffens, Logan Jones, Cade Piper, Jennings Dunker. It's a great offensive line. And then Terrell Washington Jr. has really emerged. Same with Xavier Williams. We knew about Jason Patterson. It's a deep running back room. Well coached, I would add. And Gronowski adds an element to that. I've been impressed, honestly, over these past few weeks with the Iowa offense. I was even impressed with it against Iowa State and how they took advantage of some plays and penalties. And in the second half, they went on some long drives against what I think is a pretty good Iowa State defense and the strength of that Cyclone team. Unfortunately lost, but it was by 3 on the road. And the way they lost it, I think, suggests they're actually better than Iowa State. They were just on the road, and Iowa State started off faster and had the better quarterback in that game, and still do. I just don't think to the same margin. So Iowa State won, kudos to them. But Iowa's a pretty good team. They're probably underrated in the public's view here. I think that their trench play, including the defensive line and special teams, are X factors for the Hawkeyes. For Indiana, it's Fernando Mendoza. It's an offensive line that features Carter Smith, Pat Coogan, Drew Evans, Bray Lynch, and Khalil Benson. It is a receiver core with E.J. Williams Jr., Omar Cooper Jr., and Elijah Surratt. And then you got Kobe Martin, Kalen Black, and Roman Hemby. And Riley Nowakowski, who got a long touchdown against Illinois last week on a screen pass. This is a wonderful, uber-efficient offense that Iowa will be tested by here in this game. And that's why I'm super excited to see it and to watch it, because Iowa has the best defensive line they've played all season long. They probably have a better secondary than the secondary Illinois played with for the majority of the game, though it's pretty close. And Iowa's linebackers, they're not as good as last year's, but I've been impressed with their tackling, and they keep improving every week. Not perfect. The defense overall right now by efficiency metrics is worse than last year's defense. That's something I quite frankly agree with, but I still think it's a Phil Parker coached unit. The defensive line's the strength of this team, and Indiana relies a lot on their offensive line playing well in order to run that offense because it's very RPO based. The run is heavily involved. Your quarterback needs to be comfortable, needs to have time to make that correct read, whether or not to pull, hand it off, who to throw it to. It's a very intricate system that helps them destroy teams with similar talent. But if one part of the system is off, as we saw against Old Dominion or last year in the big games against Ohio State and Notre Dame, a lot can be off. If Indiana plays clean here, I don't see much of a path for Iowa to win. So clean doesn't even mean they win the trenches. Clean just means they don't turn it over. Iowa can win their D-line versus IU's O-line, and if Indiana simply is willing to struggle and ugly it up and not turn it over, I still think Indiana wins and probably covers here. The path for Iowa to win is Gronowski being able to hit downfield passes, being accurate, poised, and comfortable, Iowa being able to run the football, and Indiana likely losing the turnover battle, or maybe they lose special teams in an absolutely major way. That is the pathway for Iowa to win this football game. They have to have the better offensive line. They have to have the better defensive line. Gronowski has to do his best to match Fernando Mendoza, which, look, he's not going to totally match him. Mendoza right now could be QB1 in the upcoming NFL draft. He's playing at a phenomenal level. When you complete 91.3% of your throws against an Illinois secondary that, look, when banged up, is not as good as when it has starters, but he played against the starters for much of the game until they slowly got hurt, and their backups aren't horrible. I mean, Illinois has had a reputation under Bielema of producing good DBs, both in Ryan Walter's system and this current system under Aaron Henry, I think, has also produced great defensive backs. Unfortunately, they were just injured for parts of that Indiana game or out for targeting, which just totally stupid. Targeting should never result in an ejection, with rare instances. If it's intentional and unsportsmanlike, yeah. But in general, the state of targeting is broken. You'll probably see an example in this game, since both defenses tackle well, they hit hard, and often tackling well and playing hard. The line between that and the targeting rule is very, very slim in a very stupid, asinine way. But Iowa needs so much to go right for them in order to not just win the game, but I would argue even compete in the game. And this is where I lean Indiana pretty strongly here, I would say. I think that they are demonstratively better in passing offense, in passing defense, in rushing defense. Rushing offense, I do not think they're uber better than Iowa. That is one of Iowa's epic strengths. There's an argument to make that Iowa could have a better rushing offense. Not overall. Indiana's is better overall. But depending on the circumstance, you may want to prefer Iowa's. Depending. I think just with how Gronowski's more mobile and built to be more of a runner than Mendoza, and Iowa does have a very strong offensive line and deep running back room that at this point might be deeper than Indiana's, you may want Iowa's rushing attack again, depending on the circumstances. But overall, Indiana's roster is better at every position, or matches Iowa close enough at every position to where I don't think this will be very competitive. I think Indiana's staff is better. I think that Iowa special teams is slightly better, but very slightly. And when you factor in development and how they've played, I think Indiana's much more talented here. So I am going with Indiana to win, and I'm going with Indiana to cover that 7.5 point line. I think Indiana pulls away in the second quarter or third quarter. First quarter will be competitive enough scoring-wise, I believe, or maybe it won't be. But I think at a point it will be competitive enough scoring-wise, maybe the first drive or two where you think, okay, maybe Iowa can hold on, but you're watching and you're thinking intuitively, yeah, if things don't change, Indiana's going to really put it on here. And that's what I think they're going to do. I think that they're not going to put it on in the way they did against Illinois, because you're not at home, you don't have the nighttime matchup. I think that Indiana doesn't match up as well with Iowa as they do Illinois, but I still think they will win by multiple scores, and they will already have almost a guarantee cover of the spread by halftime, and from there they'll pull away. They'll continue to run up the score a little bit through the third quarter, or if it is competitive for longer than that, early fourth, and eventually I think you'll see the backups as you have for every Indiana game. No disrespect to Iowa. I think Iowa's a good team. I've just said since really January, February, that Indiana's going to be better than they were last year, and they're going to do a better job in big games and big moments because they've upgraded their roster talent, they retain their staff. Consequently, more of those players will get more of that elite development, and I think Cignetti has learned things from last year as a coach. Also, Mendoza against Illinois finally checked all the boxes for being better than Rourke, where doesn't just have a higher ceiling, he has a higher floor too, in addition to also being mobile, which adds different elements to his game. I just think Indiana's that good, especially against teams that don't have top 5, top 10 talent rosters. We'll see. I have a sneaking feeling they could be good enough to overcome those and actually scale to any opponent they play this year. Just a feeling. Not saying I think that way. But I think in this game, where Iowa just does not have enough of a talent edge to cause scaling issues for Indiana, I think the Hoosiers win pretty big. Okay, LSU and Ole Miss. Let's get to it. Let me see what all of you think. Line is up to 8.5. Is it up to 8.5 on? I don't think it's yet on ESPN, or maybe it is, but it updated live. Gosh, that is insane. That's crazy. Yeah, it's still 7.5 on ESPN, but it's 8.5 on FanDuel. And I use both. I try to use FanDuel for the lines, but as long as you're really within a point of the line, especially if another major book has that line there, like ESPN's, you're pretty good. I imagine this line will grow to maybe 9.5 throughout the week. And I don't think people are overreacting there. I think if anyone's going to be overreacting to Indiana's dominance, it could be against Oregon. But we'll see. Again, when lines move, it's not the public moving lines. It is sharps and reputable bettors with money who move lines. So even a billionaire just dropping a bomb of money, if he's not reputable, sometimes books won't even move for that. They move for sharps, for the educated and wealthy. So on a Venn diagram, you got like 4 spots. Casual, like just casual, educated, wealthy, and poor. The intersection between any of those, unless it is the intersection of wealthy and educated, and more so reputation than education, that is what moves lines. So you're looking at the experts, and they get stuff wrong. Sharps get a lot of stuff wrong, just not nearly as much as the public does. They are telling you that we love Indiana in this game, and I do too. I think Indiana, the only teams they will have issues against are your Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, Georgia, maybe Texas, maybe Alabama. But Texas has enough issues on offense. Alabama's enough issues in the trenches to where, unless I see more improvement, and we'll figure out pretty quickly, I could see Indiana playing with those teams close. For example, those are, I think, the teams Indiana will run into issues with. In terms of teams like an Iowa or Illinois, you don't want to have anyone else but Indiana beat those teams if your goal is winning by the most possible points. I think Indiana does a better job than any team in America of beating the little guy and making sure you beat the little guy. And that's because I think they are the most fundamentally sound team in football. I thought that way last year. I think that way this year. Let's talk about, though, LSU Ole Miss, and we'll get to some other games, of course. Let me see any comments that anyone has. Who is better, Kirby or Sig? Kirby's better. Signetti, just had to pause to think about that for a minute. Signetti would need to go 12-0 and probably win the Big Ten and maybe a playoff game for me to put him ahead of Kirby. Just saying. I have that much respect for Kirby. I think he's clearly the #1 coach in football right now. Anyway, LSU Ole Miss. The LSU Tigers travel to face the Ole Miss Rebels in the annual Magnolia Bowl. Kickoff is going to be at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 82 degrees Fahrenheit, 6-mile-per-hour winds at kickoff. Ole Miss opened up as a 1.5-point underdog, but since then the line has traveled in favor of Ole Miss, with the Rebels being favored by 2.5 points. Very excited to see this game. It was either this game or the Alabama-Georgia game in my mind that was going to be the most evenly matched, tight game of the week. I went with Alabama-Georgia, and I will explain why here, but this is a close runner-up. Both of these teams have their fair share of issues. Both have their exciting players. Both have quarterbacks who I have questions about, but have really made me excited when watching them at different points. Garrett Nussmeier and Trinidad Chambliss, of course, are the quarterbacks that I'm talking about. Nussmeier, I didn't list as an X factor for LSU only because I think their defense is that good. All of their defense. I've been really impressed by Blake Baker this year. Chambliss I listed as an X factor because he's played well thus far. Quarterback is very important in a Lane Kiffin system. He doesn't turn it over. I think he's a good distributor. I think he has enough arm talent to make some big-time throws here and there. And then on top of that, their wide receivers and their tight ends have impressed me too. For LSU and Ole Miss, it's really going to come down to, I think, does the LSU defense or the Ole Miss offense put more on the table? Do they score more points or give their team more opportunities to score points? Because obviously you're not going to be getting many defensive touchdowns or scores at all, if you get what I'm saying. For LSU, Jack Pyburn, Dominic McKinley, Bernard Gooden, Patrick Payton, Whit Weeks, West Weeks, Harold Perkins Jr., Mansour Delane, A.J. Halsey, Tamarcus Cooley, P.J. Woodland, and some others in the depth chart. It's been a very impressive defense. Has the argument to maybe be the best defense in American argument. For Ole Miss, Harrison Wallace III, Deshaun Stribling, Caden Lee, Deuce Alexander, and then Daquan Wright, Austin Simmons, and K'Wan Lacey. I've been impressed with their skill position play. And their offensive line lost a lot. I don't think it's dropped off a ton from last year. Now, last year's unit, I think, was underwhelming to begin with for Ole Miss, but it's encouraging to know that I think not Austin Simmons, I thought he would start at the beginning of the year, so that's why he's still in my mind, but that Trinidad Chambliss is protected. I thought that their win over Tulane, and I know it's Tulane, but Tulane destroyed Northwestern. Tulane was power rated high for a G5 school. I did not see that blowout coming. That was an impressive win. The way they were able to hang on against Kentucky, where Kentucky started out hot and they turned it over a bunch, and that wasn't when they were playing Chambliss. That was Simmons himself. Thought that was impressive, honestly. You're losing the first quarter 10-0, and then you win 30-23, outscore Kentucky 30-13 remainder of the game, and at one point it was 30-10 remainder of the game. So Ole Miss is undefeated, LSU undefeated. LSU is ranked 4th, and Ole Miss is ranked 13th. Why is Ole Miss favored, by the way? They're ranked lower and yet are favored. Well, that's because rankings are rankings. And the AP poll and rankings are broken. Ole Miss is favored. They have a 20.7 FPI rating, which is 17th, to LSU's 14.6, because their margin of victory against what looked at first like a much harder schedule for LSU, but Clemson's 1-3 now. Florida is also 1-3, and DJ Lagway's in a boot again, so he'll probably redshirt, and Napier's done. It's just a matter of if. It's a matter of when, not if. Ole Miss with a similar schedule now, which is insane. I never thought Clemson would be that bad. They have a 0.337 points per play margin, scoring 0.611 points per play on offense. LSU is 0.146 points per play margin compared to Ole Miss, and they only score 0.303 points per play offensively, which is pretty bad, especially factoring in the opponents they've played. That is why Ole Miss is a favorite here, along with, I think, a little bit of the history of the Magnolia Bowl, where usually, not always, but always since 2020, though that could change, and usually the home team wins here. And that's been a theme of this rivalry game. Whether or not LSU can support Garrett Nussmeier, what I mean by that is not just running the ball, but protecting him. That's a key story for LSU. And for Ole Miss, I think whether or not Chambliss can handle Blake Baker, and not by himself, with the help of Kiffin, with the help of the offense, whether him and the offense collectively can handle Blake Baker, not dominate, not necessarily even beat him, just handle him and not fall apart, is another key storyline here for the Rebels. I think that there are a lot of them here. When looking at the rivalry aspect here, the home team's won since 2020. That goes in the direction of Ole Miss. But I think that defense is a huge theme in this game. LSU's defense is 8th in adjusted EPA allowed per play, per game on paper. They allow a 36.4% success rate. Their success rate allowed is actually pretty high for the other top defenses, but they do a really good job of being fundamentally sound, getting pressure when they have to. Teams only running them for 3.6 yards per carry, only passing them for about 5.3 yards per dropback. They're an excellent defense. Blake Baker's been in his bag since day one. For Ole Miss here, Ole Miss's strength is offense. Ole Miss offensively so far this season has had, top 25, top 20, top 15 offense, I would say. They have a lot of success through the air, averaging nearly a 50% overall success rate and a 52.1% passing success rate, but they only average about 5.1 yards per carry on the ground. That's against a pretty easy schedule. Offensively, we know LSU is a mess. I don't think we need to even bring up data for that. The way they've scored, or the lack thereof of scoring, has been pretty damning. But Ole Miss's defense has issues of their own. Defensively, they're 37th in adjusted EPA allowed per play. They're allowing teams to average 5.7 yards per carry and only generate a 7% havoc rate. That means only 7% of the offensive plays that their defense allows are sacks, interceptions, passes defended, forced fumbles, TFLs. That is pretty low. It's in fact pretty bad for a defense to have that low of a havoc rate with this schedule. The problem is LSU, they can stop the run, so they'll probably stop Ole Miss's rushing attack to a certain degree. But at least Ole Miss has mobile QBs that can help. With LSU, they can't run the ball, and Nussmeier's a statue. So even though Ole Miss's rushing defense is pathetic analytically, will they really be able to take advantage of that, especially on the road in a rivalry game where Ole Miss's crowd is going to be hostile, and Kiffin's going to want this win, because last year's loss in overtime, which Ole Miss dominated the whole game, led the whole game, and then they lose in overtime, if they win that game, they go to the playoffs, and Kiffin would be remembered differently, and Ole Miss would have made history last year. They even could have won the Natty. They weren't the best team in America. They weren't even the second or third, but they were up there. They're like the 6th, 5th, 4th best team in the country. They were really good. And I have been impressed with what I have seen out of LSU's defense. I have. There is a but, though. The defense is very important. I trust Kiffin enough offensively in a game like this at home with how this rivalry is gone to score some points. And Ole Miss, no doubt, is going to have the best offense LSU has played so far. They're also going to have the best quarterback. Chambliss has looked better than Lagway, certainly better than Klubnik, and any of the G5 FCS opponents like Southeast Louisiana. We're not counting that here on College Football with Sam. Come on, guys. I think that Ole Miss's offense is going to test this LSU defense, especially with it being at home and Kiffin giving special attention to this game. And the way the Tulane game went, too. It wasn't competitive. It really was not. And when that happens, you start looking ahead. And it's the same with LSU versus Southeastern Louisiana. But there's just something about this game that I like for Ole Miss and I don't like for LSU. And the thing that is, really, is that LSU can't run the ball. And they are so bad at running the football. I mean, Clemson's defense isn't even that good, guys. They couldn't run the ball on Clemson. They could at times, but Clemson got a ton of TFLs on them. They struggled against Louisiana Tech running the ball. Florida put their run game in a box until they were on the field, and they gave up that one flukishly long run to close out the game. LSU can't run to save their life. So in that regard, I don't think that they're going to run an Ole Miss, even though Ole Miss's rushing defense is quite bad. I think that these offenses and defenses are going to be very evenly matched. I think this is going to be a one-score win for Ole Miss, like it was in 2023 at home, when both offenses are probably better than they were now. LSU's defense was far worse, opposite end of the spectrum. They were all offense, no defense that year. This year, I think LSU, honestly, is no offense, all defense. And Ole Miss is a tuned-down version, certainly, of who they were last year. And I also think this team is worse than they were in 2023. Probably more of a 2022 Ole Miss caliber team in terms of just a power rating. I think Ole Miss will run the ball better than LSU. I think that both passing offenses will be pretty equal. Ole Miss's special teams unit is better. They have a kicker who can make a very long kick, over 50 yards. LSU's Damian Ramos can as well, but he is not as reliable, in my opinion, as the Ole Miss kicker, that being Lucas Carneiro. Yeah, he's 10 of 11 for field goals right now. 10 of 11 with a long of over 50. Damian Ramos right now is 6 of 8 on the year, and he's a career 70, 80% kicker, doesn't always make the long ones. Carneiro was a 94.7% kicker last year, and the special teams efficiency also leans towards Ole Miss. So little things, like I think Ole Miss being a little bit better at running and LSU not being able to run because they're so bad there on Ole Miss. And I also think Kiffin is the better schemer than Brian Kelly. I believe that. So in this individual basis, I am going with Ole Miss to win, and I'm going to go with them to cover 2 because it's a 2.5-point spread. So I'm not going to pick a team to win by less than a field goal. That would be oddly specific. So I think that Ole Miss will win here. They'll cover. They'll win by anywhere from probably 3 to 8 points. Now we can move on and talk about Ohio State and Washington. I'm very excited to talk about this game. This is going to be an awesome game. Very excited to see Matt Patricia's defense against Jedd Fisch's offense. That's something that I am absolutely pumped to witness and to be a part of. So very excited. Ohio State went on the road last year to Oregon and lost. I don't think this Washington team is as good as that Oregon team. I also don't think this Ohio State team is as good as last year's Buckeye team. It's going to be an interesting test for Ohio State. That's all I'm going to say. Go Ducks, Puddles. I see that you're in here. See people putting in LSU. Go Huskies, Moody Meatball. I'm also seeing people pick Indiana to win decisively. I am going to, just quickly, because I don't want to interrupt the show anymore. Sorry about the interruptions, guys. I'm going to go to the bathroom really quickly, and then I will be right back. We have 4 more games to get to. I suspect that we will be off air probably by 8:30, 8:35. See you guys very soon. Pretty eventful stream we've had so far. Sorry about the interruptions, guys, but we're about to be out of here. Yeah, Ohio State, Washington. Let's get to it. This is going to be a game that'll occupy my 3:30 p.m. slot. That's for sure. And it's going to be 12:30 p.m. local time, just right after noon. The Ohio State Buckeyes, number 1 ranked, coming off of a bye, have a new, unique test as they travel out to the West Coast for the first time since last year when they played Oregon on the West Coast and suffered their only road loss of the season. That didn't sound right for whatever reason, so double take. The first-ranked Ohio State Buckeyes, coming off of a bye, travel to Husky Stadium on the West Coast, their first trip to the West Coast since last year against Oregon, and have a new test. The Huskies also have a new test as well. This is the first time they're playing a ranked opponent this year, the first time they are playing a Power 4 opponent. This is the Big Ten opener for both these teams, taking place at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. 67 degrees Fahrenheit and 3 mile per hour winds projected. Very early projection, I know, but thought I'd include it. At kickoff, Ohio State opened up as a 13.5 point favorite, I think, last week. That line has come all the way down to minus 9.5 for Ohio State at some places, minus 8.5 at FanDuel. You got to bounce around to find where the line exactly sits, but it's at 8.5, 9.5 right now. Wouldn't be shocked if it came further down than that throughout the week. It's a new test for Ohio State. I said in a Twitter post that I think with hindsight, this is now Ohio State's toughest test. Said that and got some pushback for it as people were saying I was diminishing the Texas win, and I'm not. That was an impressive win. I picked it to happen because I thought that Day was the better coach than Sark. Indeed, he is. I was correct on that, and I think that was obvious for the whole year. The fact that I thought Texas's matchup advantages that I believed in earlier in the preseason weren't quite as critical as some of Ohio State's matchup edges. And look, I was right. Picked Ohio State to beat Texas, was right there. However, Texas's offense until last Saturday against Sam Houston State, and Sam Houston State's awful, so I don't know how much you can take away from it. Their offense looked pretty trash. It was bad upon bad upon bad. Missed throw after missed throw, no confidence, lack of communication. I mean, these were things you saw against the Ohio State game independent of what Patricia was doing. So the reason I said this is a new challenge, and perhaps the toughest challenge Ohio State's faced yet, is if, and I think this is very likely, the Texas offense that Ohio State played in week 1 was that same offense that trotted out against San Jose State and UTEP, then, well, yeah, you're going to beat them on your own home court with a good DC, a great roster, an elite roster, great defensively, and a skill position advantage at home. Of course you're going to beat a team that was operating in the 90s offensively. That was my point in that. It's not diminishing the win. It's just saying Washington, to this point, has a much better offense than Texas, and it's on the road with a quarterback who's never started on the road before. That's my only point. Ohio State's favored here. They should be favored. But Washington, they have a points per play offensively of a 0.735. And I don't care if they played UC Davis, Colorado State, and Washington State. Their offense with Jonah Coleman, with DeMond Williams, with Denzel Boston, with Amari Evans, Rashid Williams, with Quentin Moore, with Adam Muhammad, they run a really clean operation there offensively. Now, the defense is a completely different story. Defensively, I have questions for Washington, specifically as it relates to pass defense. It's not exactly a thing you want to have questions with when playing this Ohio State team. But quarterback, running back, and wide receiver, and really the offense as a whole, I think is an X factor for Washington. I think they are pretty good there on that side of the football. Ohio State also is wide receiver, tight end, and then I think they're great at defensive backfield. I didn't include Sayin as an X factor here because I don't think that he by himself or his room is as good as the receiver room, tight end room, linebacker room, or the defensive back room, especially safety. I think that Sayan's really, really good and great, but he's not the best player on his roster. He's not. He's not even, I think, a top 5 player on the roster or a top third of the starters. I mean, Ohio State has really, really good players. Quarterback is really, really good, but other players are more proven. Better, I would say, as it stands right now. I think that Washington's quarterback in Demond Williams Jr. is actually better than Julian Sayin to this point, but we'll get into that a little bit later in this segment here. Ohio State's ranked 4th, or 2nd rather, in FPI with a 22.4 power rating. Had a really bad itch that I was trying to ignore, but I just couldn't. I think it's because of the heat or something else. But anyway, Ohio State has a 22.4 power rating per FPI. That is 4th or 2nd nationally. Ohio State is ranked 2nd in FPI nationally with a 22.4 rating. Washington's rating is a 13.2. That is 24th. These teams, look, I think that both have strengths on offense. Washington lacks on defense, and that is where Ohio State, I think, gets that 8.5, even though they are on the road traveling across the country, is their defense has a huge margin of superiority. What am I even saying? I'm still focused on that itch. That was bad. Ohio State's defense is one of the best defenses in the land. Same with the offense. I think Washington's offense is one of the best in the land. I cannot say that about the Washington Huskies defense. Can't say that. So how is Washington going to pull this out if they can? Because this line is 8.5, 9.5 at some places. The consensus is Ohio State wins by a touchdown or probably 14, 17 points, somewhere in that range. Somewhere in between 1 full touchdown and 3 scores is probably what the expected margin of victory is for the Ohio State Buckeyes in this game. So what does Washington have to do? Well, they have to get a few stops. I think that's the main storyline here. And as for Ohio State, depending on how they travel, and by that I mean how well they handle the travel in a new environment, that can also play into Washington's hands in a variety of different ways. So, quarterback, we're going to talk about this for a few seconds or a minute here. I think Demond Williams is definitely better than Julian Sayin. Definitely. It just depends on how much better he is. Now, you may push back on me. You may for that. The reason I say that is because Sayin is clearly, and you saw this a little bit in the Texas game where he missed some reads, or in the games against inferior opponents where he panicked at times when things didn't go perfectly, through a pick or a bad ball. I think he is operating in the most QB-friendly system in America. Oregon is close, but I think Dante Moore on film and on tape has looked better than Sayin, and they've let him do more within that offense. Sayin's a great QB. Demond Williams Jr. is a near elite QB. He does not have the receivers, the tight ends, or the pass protection offensive line that Sayin has. Nor does he have the defense that Sayin does to give him multiple opportunities. Williams is 2nd in QBR, 6 touchdowns, 778 passing yards, 198.8 passer rating with 220 rushing yards. Julian Sayin, for context, is 779 passing yards, 8 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, a 75.9 QBR. His long scramble is of 3 with -7 rushing yards. He's only been sacked once, 199.8 passer rating. I think that the question in this game is how much better is Williams than Sayin. Sayin could easily have the better game here because his team is that much better. The roster is that much better. But Washington has the QB edge. If they didn't, they'd have no business only being favored to lose. So I meant be 8.5 point underdogs or favored to lose by 8.5. The spread would be that much wider in Ohio State's favor if not for Washington's quarterback advantage. That's important. Pass protection is key here. Does Sayin's pass protection continue to hold against an aggressive defense? I think it will. What about Washington's pass protection? That I'm a little bit unsure about. Washington's offensive line, from what I can tell, is pretty pretty porous for the skill position players they have. Ohio State, though, only generates a 12.6% havoc rate, which means only 12.6% of their opponents' plays are sacks, TFLs, interceptions, passes defended, or forced fumbles. Washington only allows a 7.9% havoc rate. The offensive line, I think, is a weakness of the offense, but it's a better unit than what they had last year, and the skill position players are better than what they had last year. I'm very curious to see what Patricia does and what Fish does with that chess match there. Ball control is important. Who runs the football better? I think that Washington has the better rushing offense, mainly because of the mobile QB on top of Jonah Coleman. So Washington has running back figured out and QB run figured out to a degree that Ohio State does not. As to who has the better run blocking O-line, I have not seen enough valuable film from either team to digest that. I would lean to Ohio State, but that's probably because of familiarity and seeing them play against Texas and also just giving them benefit of the doubt. And maybe I should be giving that to Washington's rushing offensive line and run blocking instead. But leave that up to interpretation. I think it's pretty close either way. Who covers better? And can Ohio State handle the travel and the noise? Those are, I think, the final factors of this game. There are some others, of course, but these are the main ones that I just wanted to talk about here. I am leaning towards Ohio State to win. I am. And in fact, I'm going to pick them to win. But I do think that they're only going to win by a touchdown. They could win by more. If Ohio State doesn't win by a touchdown, it's more likely they win by more than Washington wins outright. But there is a world where Washington wins outright and quarterback has a huge part of it. I think that there will be a lot of points scored in this game. I think that you're going to see Washington hit the 20s or 30s. They could hit even more than that. If they win, they're going to hit more than that. I don't think there's a world where Ohio State scores fewer than mid-30s, maybe upper 30s. They're going to score that or more than that. Washington will score in the low mid-20s or higher than that. That's what I see here. I don't think Washington's being held to under low mid-20s. Ohio State is not being held to under mid-high 30s. If Washington wins, it'll be in like a 45-42 or 43-42 style of game, or more than that. If Ohio State wins, it could be that, and the scores are flipped, or it could be Ohio State 56, Washington 24. So I'm kind of going in the middle of that there, and then leaning towards the line movement. That's kind of my thought there. I think that Ohio State's passing offense is going to eat this Washington pass defense alive. I think Sane will have a clean pocket. He'll get to throw. The question will be just, is he rattled and does he read the defense properly? For Ohio State's rushing offense, I don't think they'll run that well against Washington's defense. It's the one thing that Washington's defense does well is they only allow, let me find it here, 3.6 yards per carry and a 35.7% rushing success rate. That would, I think, matter and be a big reason to pick an upset here, because when you were able to prevent Ohio State from controlling the game on the ground, that's when the fun begins for their opponent. But the fun begins for Ohio State when you can't protect you can't protect your backfield defensively, because they'll just go over the top on you or they'll slice and dice you. And that's kind of what I think Ohio State does to this Washington defense. I think that Ohio State will do a respectable job defending the pass from Washington, actually, though they'll have some opportunities, make some big plays there. I do think that how Washington scores points here and stays in the game is their mobile QB who can avoid sacks, Damon Williams Jr., and then Adam Muhammad, Jonah Coleman. I think they'll be able to run on this Ohio State run defense. Jed Fish will get creative. They'll be able to scheme things. I like Washington's offense in this game. I just like Ohio State's offense more, and I especially like their defense more. I also think they have the better staff. They're obviously more talented. If this is a game that comes down to a field goal or special teams, you'd pick Washington. If this is a game that I think comes down to rushing offense, pick Washington too. The problem is so much has to go right for the Huskies to even be in that position. So as much as I think that Washington will be competitive here, I think Ohio State earns another close win. It's a feather in their cap traveling out to the West and winning against a top 25 power-rated team. and they're going to move on to 4-0. Washington will move on to 3-1 with, I think, some semblance of at least encouragement. Maybe not a moral victory, because not everyone likes those, but I think they'll play Ohio State competitively. And I think that they will have some opportunities to maybe even win the game. But I'm trusting Ryan Day, going with Ohio State, their roster advantage, the coaching edge, and the overall talent and depth edge, and picking them to win. But I think Washington will cover. Now we can move on to USC and Illinois. It's going to be a fascinating we're finally at the noon kickoff games, guys. Finally at the noon kickoff games. Make sure to like the video. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. Make sure to hit that notification bell, so that way you can get notified when we go live at different times. Gosh, I don't know why. Today's just been so off. The live show has been so off with different interruptions. For whatever reason, I'm not feeling all that great, I think. But we still have almost 1,000 views. We'll probably get more views than that. Thank you so much for being on here with me. And let's continue. The show must live on. The USC Trojans, fresh off a win over Michigan State at 4-0, are traveling to the Illinois Fighting Illini, who stand at 3-1, 0-1 in Big Ten Conference play, coming off of a humiliating loss to the Indiana Hoosiers, 63-10. This is going to be a noon Eastern time kickoff. 9 a.m. Pacific time for USC, 11 a.m. Central time for Illinois. 69 degrees Fahrenheit, 9 mile per hour winds at kickoff. The Trojans are only favored by 7.5. This is fascinating. This is a game that I think a lot of people are going to get wrong, and a lot of people are going to overreact to different things to predict this result. That's where I'm going to kick off this preview. And maybe you already know where I'm going with this, but let me further explain myself. So, USC is 4-0. They're top 5, top 10 in almost every efficiency model. And according to the game on paper, they're actually the second best team in America in adjusted expected points added per play. And they have a plus 18.6% success rate. Illinois, meanwhile, they only have a plus 8.1% success rate, and they have a negative 0.04 expected points added per play adjusted. That's just because Indiana beat them down that hard. Indiana's ranked 6th in that category, and if you don't adjust for strength of schedule, they're only behind Florida State in that category, and they lead the nation in success rate margin. Again, Indiana's a really good team, and this is where I want to begin this. People are going to overreact to that Indiana game with Illinois. Not saying I think Illinois is this top 10 team still. No. They're not even top 15. They're probably not even top 20. But top 30, top 25, that's kind of where they are. That's kind of where they are. That's where USC is ranked. Same with Illinois. Though the metrics, the power ratings would suggest that USC is demonstratively or demonstratively better in this matchup. Illinois only has a 0.069 points per play margin. USC, meanwhile, with a 0.524. USC scoring 0.82 points per play. Illinois only 0.479. But again, you have to adjust some of those things for the opponents they've played. Illinois has played the 6th best team in FPI, Indiana, and a team that is, I think, also 6th or maybe 5th in ESPN's efficiency metrics. Again, Indiana. USC hasn't played anyone like that, let alone on the road. This is going to be USC's toughest test so far. It's why the spread on this game, from USC's perspective, is the closest that it's been all season long in any game. USC's always been favored by double digits so far this year. This is the first time that they are not. I think that quarterback, so Jaden Mayava for USC, Luke Altmaier for Illinois, is an X factor for both teams. Linebacker and DB are X factors for Illinois. So that's Torrey Cox. That is, I believe it is Miles Scott, who is the healthy one of the Scotts. Xavier Scott's out for the year. Miles Scott will be back from the targeting penalty since he was ejected in the first half, therefore it won't carry over into this game. It's Caleb Patterson. You look at linebacker, it's Dylan Rosiak. Also got to keep in mind Gabe Jacques outside linebacker edge player. For USC, Waymon Jordan, Eli Sanders, that's the running back tandem. And at wide receiver, you got to pay attention to Mekhi Lemon, maybe Jacoby Lane. He's out indefinitely, though, so I wouldn't count on him playing in this game. But he could. Out indefinitely probably means he's out for this game, but that also doesn't mean he's out for the season. So we'll see there. We will see. But I think that this is a dangerous spot for USC. I'm taking it from USC's perspective, but we'll get the Illinois perspective too. This is dangerous because everything that went wrong for Illinois last week, where Indiana just killed them, basically took their manhood, everything from a environment perspective is now going wrong for USC here. It's a road game across two time zones. Three time zones, 2 if you don't count USC's home and just the ones they're traveling over, 3 if you count Pacific, Mountain, Central, count the time zone where they're traveling from. Don't really care either way. We all know what we're talking about. You get to Champaign, and it's going to be a hostile environment because Illinois fans, I think, are still excited about the year. They're still ranked. They're still 3-1. That's probably their toughest matchup of the whole year. And if you look at the power ratings, the only better team they're going to be playing is Ohio State. And maybe USC, but at least USC and Ohio State are at home. And they will want their team to win. You are going to kick off at 9 a.m. 9 a.m. And it's not like Oregon traveling to Northwestern, where you can kind of sleepwalk through that game and win. No, this is a team in Illinois who would beat Northwestern by probably 30 points, I would venture. Probably 30 points, or maybe even more than that. Illinois is a good football team. By good, I mean on a spectrum. If by good you mean top 10, top 15, no. By my standard of good, you just got to be above average, or maybe a little bit above average. That's where I think Illinois lands. They're not great. They're not near elite. They're not close. Certainly not elite. But they're an above average, good football team. And they'll be at home at 9 a.m. your time, 11 a.m. their time. And they're used to kicking off that early. They've done it for years with Big Noon kickoff, years in the Big Ten. You, if you are USC, are not used to kicking off that early. I can't remember the last time USC kicked off that early. Maybe they did last year at some point. I can't remember if they did or did not. Intuitively, I would say they did not. It's a very early kickoff time for USC. And I think that could present some issues in the sense of maybe not playing your A-plus game. Maybe. Maybe I'm wrong there, though. But let's look a little bit deeper than that. That's one red flag, is how early it is, and the fact that Illinois is, based on the history of Bielema at Illinois and his prior programs and how excited the Illinois fan base was for the season, the fans and the team aren't going to give up after that game. So that's red flag 1. Red flag 2 is I think that Illinois matches up better with USC than they did Indiana. USC, it's not a guarantee that they will dominate the lines of scrimmage here. Teams have been able to run on USC, and USC's offensive line, while I think it's good, and their rushing attack is certainly good, I don't think it's as good as Indiana's offensive line. Their rushing attack is, and a lot of that has to do with scheme. Shanahan's scheme versus Riley's scheme. USC's is definitely more explosive, more side to side. Indiana's is a bit more downhill running, for example. So you get more big plays with USC's rushing offense, but you can also have more TFLs if you face a solid defense that's good at tackling and has good players to set the edge. And in theory, Illinois had that and has that. But that's in theory. In practice against Indiana, that didn't work at all. But we predicted that here on College Football with Sam. And Illinois, if they're healthier in this game, you'd expect better defensive play. I think they'll rebound, but there is a question as to whether or not they will be healthy here. That's a key factor, is health. But for both teams, if Jacoby Lane plays here for USC, that's a big deal, especially with Xavier Scott out for the year. If Everyone else for Illinois' defensive back core is healthy. That is a big deal, especially if Jacoby Lane then can't play. Because then if you're USC, you're really limited to one elite receiver and everyone else is, good, but more on the unproven side, especially relative to Mekhi Lemon. For quarterback play, I think Maiyava's better than Altmaier. I think that's almost a guarantee. But Altmaier is also a really good quarterback. He's a dog. He's clutch. This is going to be the toughest test for Maiyava by a mile because Indiana's a much better defense, obviously, than Illinois or Michigan State, but Illinois also has a better defense than Michigan State. Michigan State can't get stops against effective offenses, or even basic offenses they struggle to get stops against. They'll get some, but there's a reason Youngstown hung 24 on them. There's a reason that Boston College put 40 on them. There's a reason USC put 45 on them, despite, I think, not playing their best game, missing Jacoby Lane, and having a really stupid turnover inside of their own territory. That defense has issues. Illinois is not perfect, but they have a better defense, I think, than Michigan State does. Pass protection is going to be a key thing here. I don't think USC's pass blocking has been tested yet. This will be their toughest test. But as for Illinois, they've been tested in pass blocking, and Duke got to them. Indiana crushed them. USC has big physical defensive linemen and twitchy athletes there. They have been inconsistent on the defensive front, though, so I'm curious to see as to whether or not they'll get the same pressure that Duke did. I don't think they will get the same pressure that Indiana did. As for run blocking, which running backs can hit holes? Are there holes at all? Which offensive line can produce those? Specifically for Illinois, are they able to run well enough to lean on it late in the game and trust that to win and control USC? And as for USC, can they hit those big runs early? Especially with the secondary that might be banged up. You got to assume tackling drops off from that. If that is the case, can they hit those big runs and really get Illinois' defense out of sorts and stretch them? And finally, is linebacker. Eric Gentry for USC has been an absolute stud. You also have to look at Illinois and what they have in Dylan Rosiek and Josh Kritz at the linebacker position. Very good players there, or James Kritz, my apologies, and Alec Bryant, Malachi Hood. Very good linebacker core, deeper than USC's. I don't think they have a player like Eric Gentry, but that's a common theme here, actually, that I've picked up from this game, is that Illinois, at a lot of spots, more so defensively, and I would even say currently at wide receiver with Lane being out, is deeper, but USC is the better athletes at a variety of positions. I think that the final red flag for USC here, the final red flag, is that their run defense is ineffective just enough. They're inconsistent and ineffective just enough. Evidence for that? Let me show you. USC's defense so far is 43rd in adjusted points in expected points added per play. They allow opponents to have a 46.1% rushing success rate. Teams run for 4.4 yards per carry on them and have a plus 0.09, so 9/100ths of a point added above the average in rushing. That is just enough to let Illinois put a little bit of a wedge in the crack and hammer it slowly enough to where if they're in the game, they'll eventually control it and probably control the fourth quarter. That, I think, is the final red flag. It's not like Illinois' offense is this amazing unit that is elite at running the football. In fact, their rushing success rate is, it's not amazing, but 47.1% is an above average rushing success rate, and they average 5.1 yards per carry on the ground. And keep in mind that it's against an Indiana rushing defense that last year was first in yards allowed per carry, and that led the nation in rushing yards allowed per game, I believe, or they were second. When you adjusted that through strength of schedule, they were still top 5. And I think they're an even better defense this year than they were last year. So I did not view Illinois as a top 10 team preseason. I basically view Illinois for what I viewed them in the preseason. They are a top 25, top 30 team. Indiana's a top 10, maybe even top 5 team. And that is why Indiana blew out Illinois. Not because Illinois is awful in 5-7, 4-8 quality, because Indiana is just that good, especially when their opponent doesn't have a talent edge. I think Illinois will be able to pass on USC a bit. I think they'll be able to run on USC a bit. I think they'll generate offense here. But I also think USC will generate offense, and I believe that they have the better staff. I still think Riley's playing angry, and they have more talent. So unless Illinois here is perfectly healthy outside of the injuries that we know, and USC is as banged up as realistically possible, or USC is, I have a hard time envisioning Illinois coming out and winning. Not saying they can't. I think there's a very good chance Illinois can win. There's a difference between me saying I have a hard time envisioning it and me saying there's a small chance of it happening. I am picking USC to win, but I think Illinois is going to cover. In fact, I think Illinois covering here is one of my favorites of the week. The reason I'm not picking it as an outright win is I think that, and I could change my pick on this when I do videos later in the week covering this matchup more in depth. I could change it. Right now, I just trust Maava more than Altmaier, and I trust Lincoln Riley more than Bielema. I also think that USC is the better offensive line and a good enough defensive line to mess with Illinois' offensive line. And that's what Illinois hangs their hat on, is their offensive line. They can win in other ways, but USC doesn't really turn it over, and they're solid enough in the trenches to, I think, hold their own against Illinois. But I think that USC wins by 3 to 7 points. I don't think they get above that. So it's going to be a back-and-forth classic, one of the more entertaining and competitive games of the week. So I like USC to win here, but I'm not very confident about it. I am more confident in Illinois covering than I am USC winning. I will say that. I think USC wins by anywhere from 3 to 7 points, and heck, I'll extend it. They win anywhere by 1 to 7 points. I think this game could get pretty weird given the state of both of these teams' rosters, and I think the desperation of their head coaches and staffs. Now we move on and talk about Rutgers versus Minnesota. Rutgers versus Minnesota. Someone says they'll be at the Iowa-Indiana game. Make sure to have fun, JK. Make sure to have fun. The Waffle Hazard. USC one-score Big Ten games. Yeah, that's an argument for why USC could lose. But let's get on to Minnesota and Rutgers. Really excited to talk about this game. Rutgers travels to Minnesota for a noon kickoff, 11 a.m. local time in Minneapolis. 80 degrees at kickoff, 9-mile-per-hour winds. Minnesota's favored by 5.5. That's kind of a weird line to me. 5.5 points given to Minnesota. Minnesota's coming off a bye. Fleck is traditionally good off the bye. They are reeling to a double-digit loss to California, though. A California team that just lost 34-0 to San Diego State. As for Rutgers, the Scarlet Knights are coming off of a home 38-28 loss to the Iowa Hawkeyes, which was also painful. Both teams have a negative 0.0 and then 2 digits points per play margin. So their average play scores fewer points than their average opponent's plays. Both of these teams are having a lot of issues. That's what that says. Because Minnesota nor Rutgers have not played in Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, Indiana, Michigan, or USC. Minnesota's toughest opponent is Cal. Rutgers is Iowa. And Rutgers got Iowa at home. Minnesota had to go several time zones over, several miles, thousands of miles over, to Cal to kick off at 10:30 p.m. And yeah. So both teams need this win, I think, to go bowling. Or at least to give them better chances of going bowling. Rutgers has all the offense in the world. They score half a point per play. Minnesota's defense only allows about a third of a point per play. Rutgers allows over a half of a point per play defensively. Rutgers' defense is just straight up bad. It's a bad unit. FPI yet views Rutgers as a better team than Minnesota, though, with a 4.7 rating, 50th. Minnesota's 2.4 rating comes in at 59th. I think that running back, if healthy, and defensive line and safety are Minnesota's X factors. And for Rutgers, it's quarterback, wide receiver, and their legendary special teams unit. Those are the units I'm paying attention to in this matchup. And I think that the key storyline here is, can Rutgers open up Minnesota's defense? And for Minnesota, is Darius Taylor healthy? That matters a lot for Minnesota. Minnesota doesn't really have that good of a rushing offense without Darius Taylor. They don't. Rutgers doesn't have much of a rushing offense either, but they don't have Darius Taylor. Even with Darius Taylor, Minnesota has struggled to run the ball. Their offensive line, I think, is a critical weakness of this team. It's not something you want in Big Ten play. Will that show up, and will that matter, though, against a Rutgers defense that is 117th out of 136 teams in adjusted expected points added per play? They allow a 44.9% rushing success rate and 5.75 yards per carry. Yikes. So if Darius Taylor is confirmed and he's 90 or 100% in this game and playing, I say that Minnesota has a good chance of winning the rushing battle. And Rutgers also allows a 46.9% success rate through the air and opponents to average 8.2 yards per pass attempt. And that's even factoring in the sacks they get on their opponents. So this Rutgers defense is really, really struggling. And I think, therefore, they need to score on Minnesota's defense to win. They can't win in a fist fight that's extremely low scoring and in the teens or maybe even low 20s, I think, here. If that's the style of game, not saying Minnesota's guaranteed to win because I trust Rutgers special teams more, but that game theoretically would favor the Golden Gophers. It would. Quarterback is interesting. I think that Kaliak Manis is guaranteed to be better than Drake Lindsey, at least right now. Doesn't mean he'll have a better stat line or play better in the game, but as of right now, he is definitely the better overall quarterback. How much better is he, though? And specifically, how much better is he in this game? I'm looking at pass protection for both of these teams. Both teams have tackle issues. Rutgers more so due to injury, Minnesota, I think, due to roster construction, but both exist. Who's better protected? Which defensive line gets home the fastest, the most? Who is the running back edge? If Darius Taylor isn't healthy, there's a world where Rutgers matches Minnesota at running back, and I don't think that's very good for Minnesota. But if Darius Taylor is healthy, the junior who had a great freshman year when healthy, a even better sophomore season despite having a worse O-line, Minnesota definitely has the ground edge then, if he's healthy. Special teams, I think, goes to Rutgers, but how much superior is it here? And defensively, look, who's better in coverage? Who's better at tackling? Who wants it more on defense? Minnesota's defense is much better than Rutgers, for sure. But it had a disappointing showing to a certain degree through the air against Cal. They do a much better job of shutting down the run than they do shutting down the pass relative to other defenses in America. A great run defense, but that may also be because Cal's offense is outside the top 100 in ESPN's efficiency. The stats I'm giving you right now and gave you beforehand are from GameOnPaper.com. Wonderful website. Minnesota only allows opponents to average 2.7 yards per carry. They have a 16.4% havoc rate, which means 16.4% of their opponents' offensive plays are a Minnesota sack, TFL, interception, pass defended, pressure, you get the point, or a blown-up play. They only allow a 23.8% rushing success rate, but a 34.9% passing success rate. You look at Cal's offense is awful. They only have a 38.8% passing success rate. Rutgers, meanwhile, offensively is a 55.1% passing success rate. So this is Minnesota's toughest test yet for their defense, and I would say their team overall, even though it is at home. This is going to be a key game for both teams. I'm excited to see which staff handles the adversity more, which roster handles the adversity more. And right now, I'm going to go with Rutgers. I think that Rutgers wins, and I think they cover. This is a line that I disagree with, even though it's moved in Minnesota's direction. I honestly don't get it, and I might be blind here to something, but Kaliak Manis looks like a potential NFL quarterback. He's finally made that jump, finally playing to his ceiling. Lindsey, I just don't think has yet, and I don't know what Taylor's status is, so I can't act like he's going to be completely healthy. And even if he is, I think that Rutgers' defense is, while horrible, they match up well enough with Minnesota's offensive line in a way that they never were going to against Iowa's offensive line to give Minnesota's offense issues. I mean, Iowa's offense, I can tell you for a fact right now, Iowa's offense is ahead of Minnesota's by a pretty decent margin. Pretty decent margin. Because their offensive line is that much better. And it's not like Lindsey is definitively better than Gronowski. It's just not true. And on top of that, I would add that I think Iowa's defense is not definitively worse than Minnesota's. I think in theory, Minnesota's defense should do a better job against this Rutgers offense than Iowa's did because they have Coy Parrish and I think a better DB room. But Iowa's the better defensive front than Minnesota does. And Parrish right now has not looked as good as he did last year. Don't know if he has the stamina to be playing on offense and special teams and defense. And he's one player. You know, Rutgers has Ian Strong. They have KJ Duff. They have DT Sheffield. Kenny Fletcher looks better than he ever has at tight end. They have multiple options. And Kaliakmanis has looked very accurate, very strong arm, nice touch on his passes. I think that Minnesota is going to compete. I think that Minnesota actually has the edge on the ground game, and Rutgers is the edge through the air. And usually I don't pick the team with the edge through the air. But I think that since staffs are equal, Rutgers is the much better special teams. And I think that quarterback is a decisive edge to Rutgers. And it's not like the trenches are a decisive edge to Minnesota. They're just going to win there, but not dominate. I am going to go with the better quarterback and the better special teams to eke it out. They're going to win and cover. I would say it's going to be somewhere between 1 and 3 points. I wouldn't even go as far to say that Rutgers will win by 7. It's going to be a very close, entertaining, quiet, but important for both programs, noon Big Ten football game. Very excited to see it. I could easily be wrong here. Wouldn't be sad to see either team lose or win. These are teams that I like both of their coaches. I like both of their programs. I like the idea of both of them being good. So my eyes will be peeled watching this game on my TV. And we saved one of the best games for last, that being Notre Dame versus Arkansas. Holy cow. And yeah, after that, I'm going to get all these videos out. We're going to have, of course, Oregon, Penn State's going to be released first thing tonight. That will be released literally right after we're done here. That might be the only game I release tonight, just to give everything else a breather, to let that game have some focus and attention on it. And then we'll release some other games tomorrow. But first and foremost, and by the way, if you want to get all the games right now, like right after I go live and splice them up, they'll all be uploaded. But if you want to see them all then, the segments, if you're live, you've already seen this, but maybe you just joined and you don't want to rewind in the live. Well, you can sign up as a paid member, depending on your membership tier, and you get early access to my videos. Not just these segments, but also videos that I'm going to schedule for tomorrow that I'm going to make tonight, including a 15 reasons why Penn State wins and a 10 reasons why Oregon wins, along with some other previews like Auburn, Texas A&M, or Iowa State, Arizona. There will be other preview games that are not going to be live on my show, but will be uploaded tomorrow or maybe early Wednesday. You will want to see those. Or maybe you don't. If you don't, then this isn't for you. But if you do want to see them early, sign up as a paid member. Depending on your tier, depending on the tier description, it'll tell you. You will get access to my videos the minute I upload them, finish the descriptions. As for Super Chats, thank you, Based4L, Maeva for Heisman. He's playing like a Heisman quarterback right now, man. His efficiency is ridiculous. He has nice touch on the ball, doesn't make mistakes. I love what I am seeing out of Jade Maeva. I love what I'm seeing out of Taylon Green, too. That's what we're going to talk about next here. Notre Dame travels to Arkansas in a must-win for two teams that are entering with very similar circumstances. Notre Dame is 1-2. Arkansas is 2-2. Now, they have similar circumstances in the sense that they need this game for the year to be a success. Success means two different things to these teams. Arkansas, success does not mean them making the playoff. It means that Sam Pittman keeps his job, and after losing much of their roster, this team has a similar power rating and record, if not better. That's success for Arkansas. So going 6-6, somehow 7-5. For Notre Dame, success is making the playoffs. It's going 10-2. And I would say or better, but you already have 2 losses. You have to win out for the year to be a success for Notre Dame. You lose this game, it's a failure. You lose any game down the road, season's a failure. This is a lifeline game. Very critical matchup for both of these teams. Quarterbacks I respect and admire in C.J. Carr for Notre Dame, Taylon Green for Arkansas. You even have some players on defense that I really admire from both of these teams. Leonard Moore, hopefully he can be healthy for this game. He's questionable right now. But for Arkansas, they had a transfer come in from Fresno State and Julian Neal, and he leads them in interceptions as their best corner right now. Quincy Rhodes Jr., a defensive end they have, he already has on the year, 5 sacks, 13 solo tackles, 6'6", 275. Based on how he's playing, he could be a future NFL defensive end. If what I have seen and what I have read is true. You look at Notre Dame, and they don't just have Leonard Moore, but, they got Christian Gray, and then offensively, Jadarian Price and Jeremiah Love. This is a game with underrated talent on both sides of the football. Not just one side of the football, but both of them. Arkansas, shockingly, is a better points per play margin than Notre Dame. Now, I know Notre Dame has played Miami, and they've played A&M. They've also played Purdue, to be fair. They owned Purdue offensively. Defensively, they still had some issues there. But Arkansas's played Ole Miss, and Ole Miss is viewed as a top 10 team by many different power ratings, and certainly top 15, top 20. And Memphis might be the best G5, G6 team. They lost to them, choked. It was an ultimate choke job. Arkansas was the better team, but they let it get away from them. And yet Arkansas has a 0.233 points per play margin, and Notre Dame's is 0.151. Notre Dame and Arkansas are both scoring above 0.6 of a point per play. Defensively, though, Arkansas is actually better, only allowing a 0.387 points per play defensively. Notre Dame's allowing 0.471. You look at game on paper data, Notre Dame is all the way down. I mean all the way down at 110th. 110th in adjusted expected points added per play. Allowing a tenth more of a point per play than your average defense does. And that's opponent adjusted. This defense is bad. It sucks and is terrible for Notre Dame standards, but even factoring those out, it's a bad unit. I mean, Freeman in the press conference looks like he's going mad over being asked, will you call the defense? 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 And he's going mad over it and saying, no, there's just issues that we have. There are things that are wrong. It's not play calling, it's fundamentals. That's the answer you don't want to hear. If it's play calling, since Freeman is a defensive savant, you can fix it right then and there. If this is fundamentals, and it sounds and looks like it is, this is not being fixed. This is who you are. If you're Notre Dame's defense, you, with all your talent, only generate 7% of your opponent's plays as TFL's sacks, picks, passes defended. You can't do anything in pass defense. You actually don't even have a bad rushing defense. You allow only 3.7 yards per carry, but you allow a third of a point more than the average pass defense does, at least in expected points. You allow 8.2 yards per dropback and nearly a 50% passing success rate, all with at least one NFL cornerback in Leonard Moore. I don't think the other defensive backs in this group are NFL caliber or even really all that good. Arkansas's defense, and this is kind of really cancerous, toxic, whatever you want to call it. Arkansas's defense is ahead of Notre Dame's per game on paper, which is really shocking and really sad. I'm trying to find it right now. Even if you know where it is, it's hard to find it because there's just so much data here on the screen. But Arkansas is ahead of Notre Dame. I know that. I'm just trying to find how far ahead they are of Notre Dame. I think they have the best defensive lineman. We already mentioned his name, but Quincy Rhodes Jr. I think would be the best defensive lineman on both teams. Arkansas's defense, is it higher than I think it is? Sorry that it's taking me this long to find it. Oh, that's where it is. It was in the middle of the pack where there are no bright colors. It's just black, which signifies average. They're 83rd in opponent-adjusted expected points added per play defensively. They don't do as good of a job stopping the run, which is a bad matchup against Notre Dame's defense, but they would do a better job getting sacks, generating pressure, and they only allow a 36.6% passing success rate. So C.J. Carr, behind an offensive line for Notre Dame that's been a little bit disappointing, you got a test ahead of you. Good luck. You're going to need it. Because Fayetteville's a weird place. Weird things happen there. Just ask Steve Sarkisian. Just ask Josh Heupel. Weird things happen in Fayetteville. Now, thankfully, it's not a night game. It's a noon Eastern time game. 11 a.m. local kickoff. But Arkansas will show up. They're going to be desperate. I feel like they believe they can win here. The line, by the way, I don't know if I updated that in the main cover, the main graphic, but the line's dropped to Notre Dame minus 4.5. The Sharps are pouncing on Arkansas here. I think Arkansas is live for an upset, and the reason I say that is because the key storyline here, what determines the game, is which team forces more defensive stops and turnovers. That's the key here. Nothing else really matters. Nothing else. We've already established that Arkansas generates more havoc and more chaos and gets more sacks and pressures on defense. That's why their havoc rate is nearly double what Notre Dame's is. So that's very helpful. Now, Notre Dame can run the ball better. Their defense can prevent the run better. But, there's an important but here. Have they faced a quarterback like Taylen Green? Have they? Tell me. Tell me in the comment section. Have they faced a quarterback like Taylen Green? The resounding, unanimous answer should be no. He already has 1,191 passing yards, a 168.8 passer rating. He has 360 rushing yards, averaging 8.2 yards per carry with 2 rushing touchdowns. He only has 3 sacks through 4 games. Last year he had 32. He has only 3 fewer passing touchdowns than he did last year. He's averaging 1.2 more yards per attempt, and he's completing 4 percentage points more of his throws than he did last year. Now, I know Ole Miss's defense isn't what it was. I know Memphis isn't awesome, but it's not like Notre Dame has a much better defense than Ole Miss. They just don't. It's not that much better. And I think that to a certain degree, second road game, Notre Dame's coming up. Arkansas probably overlooked Memphis a little bit for this matchup. Arkansas defensively has 10 sacks on the season. 5 of them have come from Quincy Rhodes Jr., Phillip Lee, another defensive lineman, is 1.5. Arkansas has 4 forced fumbles, 4 interceptions. Notre Dame defensively has 3 interceptions and 1 forced fumble. So now we got the turnovers. Arkansas is going to force more turnovers. Notre Dame only has 3 sacks on the year. So more turnovers, more pressure. Arkansas will get more of those. The question is going to come down to stops as well, and we've already seen with success rate, Arkansas is better there. There's a really good chance Arkansas is the better defense, and that is disgusting. That's disgusting. And we already know that Arkansas, with Taylen Green and some of the running backs that they have, they can, with Mike Washington Jr. and Braylon Russell, they can run the ball. And they can probably run it pretty well with Taylen Green and almost anyone. So that, the turnovers, the havoc rate, the fact that Arkansas has the size of Notre Dame on the lines of scrimmage, and Arkansas generates more chaos than Notre Dame on defense. As for the desperation, I think both teams will play hard. You can always count on a Marcus Freeman Notre Dame team to play hard. Always. That's one thing Marcus Freeman never does wrong, is his teams don't give effort. Against Power 4 opponents, at least. Marshall and IU might tell you differently. But Arkansas will play hard too. And that's why I'm calling them to pull off the upset. They already have those advantages. It's too early for them to quit. They're not going to quit here. This is their coach, Sam Pittman. For Talon Green, he's played in 4 games. Petrino is the OC, and he's playing well. And this is your final year. So the better you play, more that draft stock goes up, man. And he's so good. He's clearly taken a step in his game under the second year of Petrino. Another example of the second year of a coordinator change having a bigger impact than the first year of a coordinator change. Arkansas could be better this year, despite in theory having a less talented roster, all because Green and Petrino stayed in Fayetteville and got longer time together, and Petrino figured out an even better offense to institute. Notre Dame will pass successfully against Arkansas. I think they'll run really well against Arkansas. I think they'll score points. The problem is, I think that Notre Dame will never be able to get Talon Green off the field, with rare exception. He'll have time in the pocket to throw. He will consequentially be able to run, whether he gets blitzed and Notre Dame's blitzes are ineffective, or they just send 4 and don't send pressure. He'll be able to scramble out, pick up yards. Designed runs will work. They'll be able to run up the middle. This Arkansas O-line will win against this Notre Dame D-line. I think that they will win and cover, whether it's 6.5, 5.5, 4.5, even if the lines move down to 3.5 in favor of Notre Dame. I like Arkansas to win here. I know Notre Dame is the better staff. They are more talented. They even have the better special teams. But the matchup here heavily favors Arkansas. Heavily. And the home field advantage to me was just the tip of the iceberg. So I'm picking Arkansas to win, to upset Notre Dame. Talon Green will carry Arkansas, along with, I think, the Arkansas defensive line in terms of generating some havoc and pressure, occasionally in stopping the run, but more so against C.J. Carr. And Arkansas will emerge with a win, move on to 3-2, and Notre Dame will drop to 1-3. Okay, we're done here. We're done. I gotta go release these and get some of these videos out onto YouTube. So I will see you all very, very soon. And as for J. Ben, are you in Landon doing a vid? Stay tuned on further guest appearances, whether, regardless of who it is, I really want to get Landon on the show. We'll see if we can. We'll see if we can sometime this season. Stay tuned. Stay tuned for guest appearances. You will love some of the guests we're going to have here on College Football with Sam. See you all very soon. Have a great day. Bye-bye.